This is Aeon Trespass Odyssey, a really big white box that doesn't have its name on top. It's also a board game about defeating giant monstrosities whose powers rival the dead gods they tread upon, specifically the Greek pantheon. So Greece is being apocalyptically destroyed following deicide when these monsters came out of nowhere, but don't worry, you get to come in and save the day with
Titans, go!
Yep, this is just a flesh mecha anime with some of that boom, over-the-top action on a massive scale, and then you get to Aeon
Trespass into the domain of the gods!
All while you live on a ship the size of a city. It's called the Argo. You're playing as Argonauts. This game is very Greek. Short summary: boss battler, non-stop dice rolling, exploration campaign, choose your own adventure storybook. 1 to 4 players. Now for the overview. The gameplay is divided into 3 categories. First is voyaging, where you move your big boat around the overworld. From here, there's triggers that send you into one of the other 2 categories: adventuring or battling. Adventure just means you're reading from the storybook. Battling is when you're fighting bosses. When you're done with whatever adventure or battle you're doing, you return to where you left off in voyage phase. Rinse and repeat until you win or lose the campaign. Winning means you unlock the next campaign. Losing means you gotta restart your current one. Also, there's 3 campaigns. By the way, the game calls them cycles. The first cycle is the brown Poop of the Labyrinth, then the red Abyss Watchers, and finally Pitiless of the Capri Sun Sport Grape Blast. Each cycle has a bunch of story cards and doom cards. Story cards are your main objectives to complete the cycle, and doom cards are for the antagonist's progress to make you lose. However, you can also lose in all these other ways, like running out of resources or time or titans. Now for some gameplay specifics, starting with voyaging. You have a timeline to track each day that passes, and each day is considered 1 round of voyaging. In a round, there's 9 steps. Not gonna fully explain them, but the gist is you move 1 space, mark 1 timeline day, then gain random resources by drawing cards from this exploration deck, before triggering everything applicable for the rest of the steps. So if your spot has an adventure icon, you stop to resolve a random adventure in the storybook. If there's this combat symbol, that means you stop and choose which boss to fight. These icons upgrade your ship's tech tree. Yeah, there's this whole other thing with a bunch of cards that improve your ship's stats, give new abilities, plus unlock new titan gear. And if there's any main story or bad guy doom triggers, you resolve those too. Adventuring is the simplest part of the game because it always plays out as you reading the storybook and sometimes making story decisions, choose your own adventure style. The rulings here are basically just marking which adventures you've done and making sure you're resolving them in the correct voyage step. For instance, normal adventures are on step 4, but story adventures are on step 7. Finally, combat, where the objective is to kill whatever boss you're fighting by getting 10 cards in the wound stack. What does that mean? Well, anytime you successfully attack the boss, you aren't dealing damage via hit points, you instead draw a random body part card from the body part deck, and you're doing damage to only that card. You're trying to roll enough damage to meet or exceed this value. Succeed and that body part card goes into the wound stack, but fail and the card goes into the discard pile. Damage doesn't carry over or anything, it's all just lost. You either get the wound or you don't. So that's how you win. As for the gameplay loop, you go back and forth between a boss round and the player round, with the boss going first. For the boss round, they draw 1 AI card from their AI deck and resolve it top to bottom. This means first find a target, which is whoever meets the earliest applicable criteria from this list. Then you do movement, then the attack, and lastly any other effects. Movement is just them moving until they're adjacent to the target and their max move value is listed in their stats. The attack will deal this amount of hits. However, you roll a d10 for each hit to see if you dodge it, trying to meet or exceed the listed value. Each hit does the listed amount of damage. On top of that, after you take damage from an attack, you compare your current health to your Titan's trauma table and draw a trauma card of that severity. So having 1 to 3 damage on you is a minor trauma, whereas having 7 to 9 damage results in a grave trauma. Trauma cards just cause random goofy hijinks, like you could gain negative conditions or even just instantly die. But on the other hand, you might attack back in retaliation or even gain buffs, with stronger traumas causing stronger effects, whether it's negative or positive. Typically, you can only handle 9 damage maximum, and going above makes you draw an obol card, which is a 50-50 you live or you die. For the player's turns, you can go in any order you want, and once everyone's taken a turn, the Titan round's over and you pass to the boss. Note that there's always 4 Titans, so if your player count is less than 4, someone one has to be controlling multiple titans. A titan's turn has one movement action and one attack action. You can do these in any order. Your move value is on your titan sheet, and for an attack you use the stats of a weapon you got equipped. Attacking is a 10-step weight loss program to cut body parts off the boss that I'm too lazy to fully explain. But the basic gist is your weapon has this number of attack dice and you roll them all trying to meet or exceed the boss's hit value. Also, your weapon adds this number to each dice result. Each attack die that succeeds results in a hit, with each hit rolling the dice shown here. Each slash icon is 1 damage towards the body part card you end up drawing, while other icons are only potentially damage, assuming you have something to activate them. If you meet the damage threshold for a successful wound, it not only puts the body part card in the wound stack, but it also removes an AI card of the same level before strengthening both decks by shuffling in stronger cards. Finally, there's a whole bunch of abilities that I'll be activating throughout the attack from your items and Titan. But the most important one, and the only one I'll explain for now, is Rage. Every time you attack, you gain 1 Rage, and Rage makes you use 1 ability from every row on your Titan's Kratos table that's equal to or less than your current Rage. So if you've already attacked 6 times and have 6 Rage, you use 1 thing from all of these rows for a sick nasty attack. Most Kratos abilities provide temporary benefits like these tokens that only last for the next attack from any Titan. That's it for the bare minimum basics of gameplay. Obviously there's tons of things happening that I left out, like boss traits, targeting tie breaks, item abilities, yada yada, but this game is super complicated, so let's just get on with it. Also FYI, I finished all of Cycle 1 and a little under half of Cycle 2. Oh, quick disclaimer, in case you're worried from seeing includes paid promotion on the top left of this video, YouTube policy necessitates that we check this box in the video settings if we received compensation in any way to make this video. Doesn't have to be monetary. In this case, we received Aeon Trespass for free as a review copy from Into the Unknown, but we didn't get paid any straight up cash money. This is being brought up because we're well aware of the controversy surrounding this game, but also I want to assert that just because this isn't a paid review doesn't make it more honest than the paid reviews that do exist on our channel. I promise all of you that we never compromise our review scores, which has actually caused issues in the past where whole videos get taken down because they weren't positive enough. Those are extreme cases. Most of the time what happens is whoever we're working with are actually okay with our criticism heavy reviews. But there's also times where the review gets scrapped mid-production in the midst of some long ass email chain and they pay us a bit of compensation for the work we already did. And then for the games that we end up scoring well, like 7 out of 10 and above, those paid reviews just go up without a hitch. But yeah, if this sort of thing makes it so you can't trust our scores and opinions, honestly, totally reasonable take given the sponsor heavy landscape of board game coverage and the obvious conflict of interest that's caused by a paid review. If you ever want to be vigilant about paid reviews or even product placement in videos, like as an example, we've inserted sponsored segments about this Origins table in other videos, just look for that includes paid promotion disclaimer that shows up in the top left of the video player. It's only there for a few seconds when you first play the video. I feel like it's not talked about enough, so I'm assuming there's a bunch of people who don't know it exists. Alright, enough delays, let's get on with the analysis. Pros! Components. First and foremost, the minis look absolutely amazing. I mean, they better considering they're this goddamn big. Like most of the space inside this box is taken up from them. But yeah, being so big really brings to life pretty much everything that's on them, like the random stuff on their bases or just cool accessories on the mini itself. Which helps to remind you that in the story, these things are absolutely gargantuan, which is just so extra. Kind of like how some of the bosses, you can literally swap out parts on them to provide platforms for your titans to stand on. Absolutely ridiculous. What a goofy, funny feature. The aesthetics of everything in Aeon Trespass really speak to its strong art direction on all the minis and art itself. Everything's all got that edgy, fantasy look, and the building / landscape scope is fantastically ginormous in scale. You'll find awesome art on the story and doom cards that'll bring to life whatever's going on in the storybook. The book itself also has 1 art piece for each of the different adventures you can go on, alongside additional battle art of the bosses. But for the rest of the thousands of cards that don't have the big money artwork, there's a ton of simplified art, like on the Nemos cards, the monster cards, the technology cards, and the condition cards. Honestly, a great aesthetic that's inexpensive and allows for so many cards to have some sort of art on them. And then of course, all the items have their own art as well. But also the map art looks awesome once you've moved around a bunch and get enough map cards next to each other. Also, all the cards feel really nice. I don't know too much about card quality, but these all got like a textured finish on them and never stick together, which I normally probably wouldn't point out, but dude, there's thousands of cards in here. Next up, for the stuff that helps with organizing, there's a bunch of decks full of secret cards in the game, but they're all divided both front and back by divider cards, which also lists all the cards in the deck if you need a component count, since you can't exactly put these lists in the rulebook. Phenomenal solution if you need to make a bunch of hidden stuff but don't want to go overboard on producing a whole ton of hidden envelopes or sealed boxes. Then the items, map cards, and boss cards are all color-coded to their respective cycles, giving not only a very distinct feeling to their looks, but also making organization of these components opponents super convenient, which is super important so that when you're playing, you only need to use the cards from your current cycle and can just leave everything else back in the box. There's also cards like cycle story clue cards, technology cards, and more that have 1s, 2s, and 3s on them for further cycle organization, with the clue cards having further labels for when they're introduced in the story. Gameplay pros! This is one of those games where it's super clear that a ton of playtesting went into so many different facets of the gameplay experience to create a working environment where you have to consider a ton of different mechanics and how they interact with each other without any of those mechanics breaking anything. Let's first go over one of the main mechanics of fights, escalating power levels. This is something that could have easily gone wrong, where something ramps up way ahead of the curve and then snowballs out of control. But it's been cleverly designed so that the power levels of titans and bosses are directly tied to each other, which creates a very tangible sense of pacing during the fight. The reason this happens is primarily because of how your titans get stronger from rage, which is gained through attacking. But successful attacks that result in wounding a body card ends up strengthening both of the boss's decks. And if you purposely try to fail your attacks to farm more rage, there's tons of drawbacks to consider. First, having body part cards in the discard pile from failed wounds means that the body part deck is smaller, since you only add stronger cards if you get a body card into the wound stack. This means that every time you successfully attack but fail to wound, you're making it so that whenever the boss escalates their decks, it's more likely that you'll be seeing stronger body part cards, which are not only harder to wound but also have stronger effects. Which brings me to the second point. Body part cards have reactive effects on them, so there's always going to be an inherent risk to attacks. Some punish you for failing to wound, some have a response to a wound, and others always proc regardless of outcome. And since you're randomly drawing these from a deck, there's no way to know for sure what'll happen beyond just knowing the boss's general tendencies. You really gotta plan around what you're willing to allow happen. Like, don't attack a Hecaton without being okay with being knocked back, because this boss loves sending you flying, potentially right into dangerous obstacles or even off the map to your death. Third, even if you fully miss the attack, which means you don't get to flip a body part card so no response will happen, you'll still get rage, but you also don't get to activate any abilities, which means you can't use your Kratos table to generate these tokens to buff the next attack, and by missing, you've probably also wasted all the tokens placed from a previous Titan's attack. Finally, the longer the fight goes on, the more innately dangerous the boss becomes in ways other than just adding stronger cards to their decks. If you're wasting time, the boss's AI discard grows and the AI deck shrinks, making it so that when you wound and shuffle in a stronger card, it's more likely it ends up at the top. On top of that, bosses usually have mechanics that generally give them steady advantages. Like the Labyrinthos, as an example, will eventually litter the whole board with labyrinth tiles, which makes it super hard to even move around and hit the boss, considering that bosses can move through obstacles and titans can't. This basically just means that there's certain drawbacks and benefits for how much juice you want to be giving your attacks. So it's up to you to figure out what's more advantageous at the moment, on top of how much you want to push your luck with certain boss responses and or shuffles. Thus, manipulating the boss decks to be more favorable towards you is a key skill to develop, especially because you can always see what level of card you're dealing with on their backs. If you see a dangerous ass AI 3 card coming up way too early in the fight, it's in your best interest to score a wound so that when you shuffle in a new card, you're hopefully shuffling that level 3 away from the top. Likewise, if there's a lucky AI 1 card on top decently late into the fight, it's worth considering holding off on wounds this round so that the boss's turn is weaker. Basically, there's always something you can be doing to inherently counterplay the boss escalation mechanic. Like, even if you were stalling and shrunk the AI deck a ton, you can still pull off a scenario where you can force a reshuffle of the discard back into the deck, because when the game removes weak cards and shuffles in new ones, if it can't find one from the deck, it instead pulls it from discard. This causes the discard to be put back into the deck, since the newly added card has to have a chance of being live as a consequence of your wound. It's a very clear design intention to make sure that when you're powering up the boss's decks, you're not just abusing the game by adding new cards to discard, yet it also leaves these windows of opportunity to reshuffle everything right when the AI deck is getting really scary from being small with only high level cards, which is a super clever mechanic. So yeah, rage being gained from attacking and attacking causing bad things to happen, so you can't really stall to farm rage, is a thing, but what about the flip side? Because that just means you should bum rush the boss and wound as fast and as often as possible, right? Well, the downside of that is constant wounds means the boss gets stronger really fast, which most likely outpaces your team's growth, because if all 4 titans scored a wound, that means the boss has already added in 4 stronger cards to both decks, while everyone on your team has only 1 rage, which is still really weak. Plus, you'd rather have a lopsided spread of rage, since that means there's someone on the team who leaves more Kratos tokens on their attacks, plus has access to more damage dice rerolls, which can greatly increase the odds of a wound in a more controlled moment whenever you decide to make the big mad titan attack. And having more certainty is much more useful than everyone having only okay attacks. But it seems like the designers recognized this and implemented a mechanic where having the highest rage means that the titan gains the priority target token, which is basically a thing to make sure that the strongest titan can't just safely stand out of harm's way and and annihilate the boss. The priority target token does two things. First, if there's ever multiple titans that meet a targeting line's criteria, the tiebreaker is the priority target. Second, bosses will sometimes just go straight for the priority target, so you can't even be safe positioning titans in front of the boss while the priority target stays behind it. However, we can also use this to our advantage by controlling who's getting attacked. Because if we have two tanky titans who are constantly neck and neck for highest rage, you can juggle the priority target between them just by changing who attacks first in the round. You only get the priority target whenever your rage is raised above the prior holder. So as long as you're consistently starting the Titan round with two tanks at equal rage, you can super effectively distribute incoming damage more evenly instead of just dumping it all on one guy who'll probably die too early as a result. Overall, a great mechanic to strategize around and a great way to have the boss deal with a runaway power Titan. That whole targeting tangent brings me to how the AI cards have a ton of consideration put into making sure that bosses can usually find a target, since each line gets more and more broad with its parameters, because the designers didn't want a situation where players could endlessly hide or be out of reach in order to have the boss whiff its turn. In fact, if all else fails, if the boss can't find a target, they will instead perform their routine card, which usually causes bad stuff to happen regardless of where everyone is. On top of all of that, sometimes AI cards call for weird targeting in the first place. Generally speaking, you can expect to be attacked if you're in front of the boss plus the closest and/or priority target, but every now and then there's attacks that go for the back, or do AoEs, or just do something entirely different. In short, the bosses exert a ton of pressure that's really difficult to cheese your way through, and you can't expect to be able to constantly run away or perfectly plan around their AI. So you pretty much have to engage with the boss's mechanics. So as you may have noticed, there's lots of mechanics in Aeon Trespass where you don't have full control of outcomes, but you still have some means of influencing the randomness, either through affecting the output or via guaranteed control of a more limited aspect. Like as an example, you can't fully control who the boss goes for or its pathing towards its target, since the rules always makes it zigzag closer until it can move in a straight line. But what you are allowed to decide is the initial direction of the zigzag to make the boss go around a Titan so that it doesn't get hurt from the boss moving through it. But back to influencing randomness, the core reroll mechanic of this game is called Fate. Basically, you can gain one Fate per one reroll of your D10s. But where the nuance comes in is how Fate also functions as your general resource, because ability usage constantly has you gaining Fate as a cost. Then on top of that, boss AI cards will have certain effects become stronger if the target is at a certain Fate threshold. So managing Fate is this strenuous threshold balancing act of considering how much insurance do you want versus how much utility do you want versus how big do you want your boss boo-boos. Oh, and by the way, those Fate thresholds on AI cards ties back to the earlier pro about how power levels constantly increase because lower level AI cards have smaller Fate triggers, whereas higher level cards have bigger Fate triggers. So yeah, just another thing to keep you on your toes no matter how you're deciding to play the fight. Alright, now let's finally explain what Kratos tokens do specifically. Basically, there's a Kratos pool that you dump Kratos tokens into in order to buff the next attack. And you usually place most of your Kratos tokens via Kratos table abilities attached to your attack. So you're always doing this conga line of this dude buffs that guy who then buffs this person. Early on, you'll only have access to two types, opening and break tokens. Each opening adds +1 to all attack dice, and each break lets you turn one of these symbols into one of those damage slash symbols. Later on, this gets a lot more wacky with stuff like diversion tokens, which let you negate fail responses on body part cards, rouse, which lets you treat your rage as one higher per rouse token, and fire, which is just straight up buffed break tokens because they do the same thing, but you can keep most of the unused fire tokens. Also, it's super funny imagining the boss on fire while you're just opportunistically beating their ass. So on top of all the prior mentioned tactical considerations involving rage management and priority target positioning, you also have to consider the best order to have all the Titans attack in to make the best use out of different Kratos tokens, and how many tokens can even be placed by different Titans considering their rage values. Some weapons really need some opening tokens to work well, and others not so much. So you get a lot out of coordinating who's setting up who. All of these considerations are easier said than done when the boss might suddenly decide to move because of a body part card response, potentially messing everything up if someone can no longer attack the boss, or maybe the tank is no longer in front of the boss, etc. Like, the only time you get to ignore this super coordinated gameplay is when there's only one Titan alive, because then their attacks are always just going to be generating tokens for themselves. In short, even a super raged out Titan isn't really stealing all the glory, since all the Kratos tokens they dump are usually going to benefit someone else. And finally, for the last bits of pros involving cool stuff you got to consider as you're strategizing, I'm going to bring up terrain tiles and condition cards. Terrain is always going to be a staple when it comes to games having minis on a grid, but I want to highlight it here because of its relation to all the other aspects brought up earlier and how this all ties together to form this super tense positioning dilemma to play through. Big shout out to labyrinth tiles as a core mechanic in Cycle 1, because how you want to have the boss position these everywhere gets pretty five-head if you can orientate them so as to not block off your Titans from attacking the boss, both for the current turn and for future ones, which matters a lot if one of your Titans Titans is super reliant on someone else's setup turn. But then aside from that, the most common tile you'll see are columns, which are basically destructible booby traps that harm whoever's pushed into them. So if you see a scary level 3 body card and manage to bait the boss to stand right by a column, you could shove it in mid-attack through a pushback ability to make them easier to wound. And then of course, try not to let the boss send you flying into a column, generally, since you realize when fighting Hecaton that because you die if you're launched off the map, you can use columns as temporary barriers so you can crash into them instead of dying from a ring out. As for conditions, a lot of them have you stop and consider an uncomfortable choice. Like despair tokens make you more likely to miss unless you're adjacent to a Titan, but sometimes you shouldn't be standing next to someone, especially if they need a certain pathway clear since you can't move through other minis. And then hatred makes your attack worse and you get rid of it by not attacking for a turn, but sometimes you really gotta risk it for the biscuit, like if you see that the boss has a level 3 AI card coming up. Basically, if I had to summarize all this, Aeon Trespass is carefully designed to make you have to consider a gajillion things and you gotta figure out which path forward fucks you up the least, all while everything is getting stronger as the fight progresses. And there's an amazing feeling of discovery for each of the bosses as you figure out what their tendencies are and eventually learn what gives you the best chances against them. Each boss feels incredibly unique with not just their varied innate abilities, but also how their AI and body part cards play into that. Like Labyrinthos labyrinth tiles are annoying for boxing you in and potentially forcing you into a bad situation where it tramples over you for a chance at an insta-kill. But Temenos labyrinth tiles makes it hard for your team to deal with despair tokens. And there's a cool risk-reward thing here where standing on a labyrinth gets you a better attack, but also can give the Temenos a shot at insta-killing you. Great mechanics that fit the boss well and add different nuances to how you deal with the labyrinth. So all of that, plus how the game truly embraces randomness all over the place, leads to absolutely bonkers possibilities. Absurd actions happen on the reg that you gotta adapt to, especially if they happen in the middle of the Titan round and change up the plan you had for the ones who haven't gone yet. I already lightly described the trauma cards, which are a huge source of randomness since sometimes being attacked becomes a really good thing. But there's a ton of other mechanics that cause absurd hijinks. If you attack and roll a nat 10 on the white die, which you always only roll one of regardless of how many dice you're actually rolling, this causes a crit chance. While you have a crit chance, if you successfully wound, you ignore all the body part card responses except for the crit effect. And crit effects are absurdly beneficial in that they can heavily impair the boss or even straight up insta-kill it on level 3 body parts. One of the goofiest results of a crit is how you can expose Temenos' vantage point, which you can then move a Titan onto and buff their attacks as a result. And this one takes the cake for ridiculous shit the designers made while smoking crack. But like when you die from an obol, you roll a d10 and on a 10, you literally come back to life and gain the powers of one of the dead Greek gods. This is straight up one of those board games that approaches D&D 5e levels of stupid shit happening regularly in combat that either works like a charm or catastrophically fails. They'll note that I specifically mean that in regards to Aeon Trespass's outcomes, not the absolute freedom that role-playing games enable, since obviously no board game can ever do that because otherwise I'd be doing crap like asking the GM if I could climb the labyrinth walls so I could do jumping attacks like a dumbass. I mean, come on, the labyrinth walls have labyrinths on them. Those are built-in handholds. Any rock climber would say that shit's easy. Last pro I want to mention that's directly gameplay related is how there's a huge amount of items and Titans you can mess around with. But to further add to that, I didn't explain Argo abilities and patterns. Argo abilities are these bonus effects you can set up before a battle and represent the Argo helping out via stuff like an arrow barrage, which dumps more Kratos tokens and is excellent for supplementing weapons that benefit greatly from more tokens. You can only bring 2 of them early in the campaign, however later on, not only will you unlock more Argo abilities, you'll also increase the amount you're allowed to bring to a fight for further possibilities. Patterns are essentially replacements for normal Kratos and trauma tables on your Titans and provide even more extra abilities that you can build around. Now onto pros about more auxiliary aspects surrounding gameplay. Starting with the campaign's progression system regarding the Titan power level versus the boss's power level. As you're playing the campaign, you're not going to be too far ahead or behind of the power curve because there's no way to unlock stuff earlier or later than you're supposed to. You don't unlock new gear by doing specific campaign stuff. Instead, the only way to get tech is literally just periodically unlocking them for free every few days on the cycle timeline. Because of these set in stone unlock points, the game is balanced around knowing that you will have a specific amount of tech unlocked by certain days. And combat strictly happens every 6 days. As a result, the rate at which the bosses become more dangerous is weighted extremely precisely against the rate at which you obtain better gear. For further failsafes, a lot of pivotal gear tech has the requirement of having fought a boss at a certain level. Plus, bosses drop loot multiplied by their level, so you can't even save up that well to just instantly craft a whole bunch of shiny new higher level gear until you actually fight the shiny new higher level boss. And to top it off, some resources can only be acquired through the exploration deck instead of fights, and those resources scale higher the further you get into the timeline. But what if you're unlucky and get a really weird distribution of resources? Well, trading is a thing, though because it's always at a loss, you're never going to get ahead with with it, only what you're supposed to have at your level. The result of this is that battles are never going to be a comfortable cakewalk and will always have numbers that are on par with yours. And the final gameplay pro is the Nessus Theater mode, which is what Aeon Trespass calls it when you just freely do custom battles outside of the campaign. This mode has an absurd amount of content. You have access to all your unlocked stuff, so no worrying about crafting costs or losing your super special titans when they die. You can just gear out at maximum power and give it everything you got. All the time. Additionally, you can choose to fight the bosses at levels higher than what's accessible in the campaign, giving these bosses a level of depth way beyond what you would ever see in normal gameplay. For context, in the campaign, normal bosses only go from level 1 to 4, and some of the special bosses always stay at 1. In the Nessus Theater, all bosses go up to level 9, so even after finishing the cycles, there's still so much more gameplay to be had if you're so inclined. Even more so because while the theater mode has no consequences, meaning you don't lose titans or gear while also not gaining resources, you can still get some special rewards that translate over to the campaign. They're relatively minor, but there is a very notable one you can get early on, which is a whole ass new titan type, which thank God it's early in the optional mode if you want to just play the campaign. Campaign pros! First thing to talk about here is how the story cards make it super obvious what it is that you're supposed to be doing to progress the story. Absolutely wonderful narrative structure to deliver the plot. Plus, they never spoil anything since it will often make you go to the storybook in between getting new story cards. So once you read the story thing happening to you, you're like, I guess that means we should be doing this new thing now. And then the next story card passage will have the rulings for how that new thing works. On top of that, the mechanics for story card progression sometimes incorporates these clue cards, which basically serve as a means of introducing something a little more complex that can't just be described on the story card. Clue cards do not all do the same thing. You only get certain clue cards based on where you are in the story, because their front sides can have literally anything on them. Sometimes they can have a map, other times they represent allies, and there's also times where they become an event deck. As a result, you're constantly dealing with new and interesting mechanics that are directly related to what's happening as you progress through the story cards. Next campaign pro is how the Argo has a bunch of different main resources to manage that are all thematically relevant. And if any of them run out, you lose the cycle. So if you have no more crew members, boom, you're done. The ship itself is damaged too much, whoops, bye-bye. You push fate too much, nope, you can't do that, wait, what? Yep, just like with Titans, the Argo also has fate that you can gain for rerolls involving the Argo. And you'll have tech abilities that, just like with Titan abilities, will require you to gain fate. Same fate mechanics work here with how if your Argo fate is too high, more bad campaign effects will happen to you, but what I didn't explain earlier is that if your Argo fate is ever forced to go above 9, that's a cycle loss. Those are just some of the more consistently prevalent campaign resources to manage, but different cycles will also introduce their own cycle unique resources into the mix. Like Cycle 1 has strangers, which represents your crew becoming strangers as they get disillusioned with you, as well as weird randos coming aboard. Then Cycle 2 has shit like refugees, captives, defectors, and you're literally fighting in a war against Sparta and its supreme leader, the Nietzschean.
Where's your motivation? This is the power of Sparta.
I'm sure you can immediately see the differences in the two cycles when it comes to their themes. Cycle 1 is all about how life is like a labyrinth that you're navigating through, but moving with intention through it gives you purpose. However, becoming lost in the labyrinth and losing hope/purpose kind of just leaves you content with accepting your fate that you're trapped, so you lose the ability to navigate it at all, aka taking the doomer pill. So not only does that whole motif come up a lot in the story, but it pops up in pretty much all facets of the game. Like 2 of the cycle's bosses are constantly throwing labyrinth tiles everywhere. And the strangers resource you really want to keep low because having a ton of strangers is really bad because that means your crew is getting trapped in the labyrinth. That's bad. Don't be like the nihilist from Big Lebowski. Meanwhile, Cycle 2 is more about looking at how strongly do you believe in and chase after your purpose. Because dogmatically chasing power results in you losing your humanity as you edge closer and closer to the abyss. AKA, wow, it'd be really nice if Aeon Trespass had the Geneva Conventions because war crimes are like totally not cool. Unfortunately, the bad guy Mr. Adolf Nietzschean loves waging war while doing rampant genocide, torture, human shields, environmental disaster, slavery, and sexual violence. So yeah, extremely over the top, cartoonishly evil villain we got over here. And for those of you wondering about any actual depictions of sexual violence, I haven't seen any. It's more that you know the Nietzschean heavily utilizes slaves and literally outright yells during a battle to take the women and have them bear Spartan children. Also, when you first meet him, he literally starts staring at all the women in your crew. Overall, very bad vibes guy. Someone should really pancake his dick with a sledgehammer. Oh, right, should probably go over any potential content warnings for those of you out there unfortunately dealing with trauma or if you just don't want to see this stuff. So in Aeon Trespass, generally expect to encounter high amounts of bloody violence in general, with a lot of wartime violence, especially in Psycho 2, though it isn't modern warfare, and there's self-harm plus self-unaliving in Psycho 1. So yeah, there's extremely strong theming that goes on with each Psycho that shows up constantly in the gameplay and writing. Speaking of, there's an absurd amount of writing done for this game. I'm really curious to know what the word count is because these storybooks are super dense since there's not too many pictures and the font size is really small. On top of that, there's flavor text on basically everything, like the tech, the items, all the boss cards, like yeah, damn. But wait a minute, is the story good? Yes, which is obviously the more important pro since having a ton of writing doesn't necessarily indicate quality. The longest written works humanity has ever created are entirely fan fictions after all. The story in Aeon Trespass is firstly a very unique spin on Greek mythology. Like as an example in Psycho 1, it really remixes what you'd expect from that myth about King Minos sending sacrifices to the Minotaur in the labyrinth until one day the hero Theseus kills it. I'd say the greatest strength of the story is how extremely compelling and unique occurrences happen constantly, with very cool aesthetics to boot. The whole thing with how the labyrinth can physically manifest from people who've given in to despair is a very clever way of representing how someone who's lost in their own thoughts, ergo the person who the labyrinth erupts from, will only see endlessly winding paths. But someone else who's on the outside looking in can much more clearly see the paths of the labyrinth. And while that someone else looking in can offer guidance, it's still up to the one trapped inside to find their way. God, that is so creative. But just like how the theming and aesthetics are twisting and turning, so are the story's revelations. Because the way that the characters' motivations intertwine with this whole labyrinth motif when combined with plot twists that uncover hidden truths is not only super captivating, but also legitimately gets you to reevaluate your opinions and decisions involving all the various factions and characters. Like just as a brief intro to the story, you're the Argonauts. All you know is you have amnesia and you awake inside of this city-sized ship called the Argo. And in your confusion, you're trying to figure out what the heck is going on and what you should be doing. In the meantime, you're randomly in Crete, and because you need supplies for the ship, you end up working with the daughters of King Minos, who promises you said supplies if you go out and find the king, because turns out Minos went AWOL. Then, as you're exploring and asking around, you learn more about the lore behind Theseus slaying the Minotaur, and how he was this hero of the commoners who inspired a rebellion against King Minos' tyrannical rule. Because as it turns out, constantly gathering sacrifices, policing your people super brutally, and wasting their tax money on stupid opulent vanity projects like hidden cities and gargantuan mausoleums is in fact a massive L. Then unfortunately that rebellion was shut down. Theseus is no more, and on top of that there's rampant corruption and infighting amongst the nobility while the gods started to die. Right afterwards, when giant eldritch monsters started popping up, so too did giant labyrinth walls steadily creeping across the island of Crete, alongside a whole new faction of fanatics suddenly popping up espousing how the truth of the labyrinth is about life being meaningless. Also remnants of the rebellion are back, just obviously without Theseus. So now that you know the Psycho 1 primer, this pro about all the motivations and plot twists should hopefully be more impactful when I tell you that depending on how you progress through the cycle, literally everything I just described there can be either completely wrong or have so much nuance and context added to it as to pretty much invalidate your understanding of the how/why it happened. TLDR, the story's awesome and very unique. So now for the last few random fun pros. I first super want to shout out the rest and relaxation adventures. Normally when you find adventure spots, you go to the storybook, do the thing, and it's all serious and relevant, but occasionally you find rest and relaxation adventures, which is literally just goofy slice of life bullshit where your crew is just fucking around. These are either wholesome fun or just legitimately hysterical. Like I will never forget the one where everyone gets shit-faced drunk and then decides, dude, we should totally start piloting the Titans right now. I won't tell you what happens next, but needless to say, that one was particularly stupid and I loved every second of it. Having these types of stories is always what I feel is missing from so many other pieces of media, because people aren't going to be super serious 100% of the time. Plus, it's just a good way to show people interacting in their day-to-day lives and partake in culture. Like, this is literally the reason why so many anime fans love when there's these episodes where you have these super powered characters doing random everyday stuff like going out and shopping or working a job. Final campaign pros to talk about are the puzzles, which, by the way, I didn't complete Psycho 1's Centimanes puzzle because it seems like to get all the pieces you most likely need multiple playthroughs unless you're really lucky with your adventures. However, what I did get to interact with were cute little puzzles to engage with where you're trying to figure out what numbers certain symbols mean. Mechanically, this was pretty cool because you could play it safe and find more symbols from adventure, but you could also just outright figure out how the numbering system works, or even just brute force it by guessing incorrectly a ton at the cost of increasing Argo fate. Guessing them correctly lets you read certain passages from the storybook that that really add to the lore because they're from the perspective of the long-gone Centimanes, who are basically giant multi-armed dudes that build wondrous technology and ended up angering the gods. And you can find remnants of their miraculous gear scattered throughout. Lastly, for secret stuff that exists across multiple cycles, not just the first, there are these passages called Dreams of Pharaohs, which are these bizarre and cryptic messages that I'm still not really sure what they mean. All I figured out is how to decode these numbers, but aside from that, I'm not really sure what else is going on here besides that this is all very much alluding to secret knowledge involving what I think is how the Argo works and how the Titan junctioning technology works. And for the only thing left before going to cons, there's secret codes you can find on some of the map cards. That way, if there's ever an interesting landmark, you can read a passage in the storybook for lore and some bonus rewards. Very neat detail. Cons! Components. I am not exaggerating when I say that Aeon Trespass takes the cake for the most amount of and the most severe component issues I've ever seen in a non-prototype board game. This part used to be, I am not kidding, almost an hour of me just explaining physical issues, which was really boring, so I've decided to condense it down into a montage. You're gonna have to do a lot of pausing and reading, sorry in advance, but skip to this timestamp if you want to just take my word for it. enough! I am not here to lose myself in the endless labyrinth of errors that is the truth of Aeon Trespass. Besides, perfection should never get in the way of being good enough, right? True, because trying to get everything perfect on something this big would mean the game would never be finished. But good enough as a bar was barely cleared, crashed through even. If I compare this to the mistakes found in other campaign games I've played, the difference is night and day. Descent, Pandemic Legacy, Rise of Fenris. I don't even think there were any. While Tainted Grail and Frosthaven had like a handful I ran into throughout the entirety of their campaigns. Aeon Trespass, meanwhile, I'm running into something every handful of hours. This blows my mind, and I am absolutely bewildered I don't see this being talked about more online. Because the criticisms usually mentioned are that the rulebook and insert are bad, but the unmentioned severity goes far beyond just a bad rulebook. Like, my world is being flipped upside down from the radio silence on this end because I thought board gamers cared a lot about errors in their games after seeing how much of a ruckus was thrown over Frosthaven's comprehensive list of errors documented in its official FAQ. And I'm with you all there. Errors fucking suck and are why I hold the opinion that designers should either stop making their games so big or to literally hire QA teams like big video game studios do. But Aeon Trespass, I'd bet good money that if it had an actually comprehensive list of errors and unclear wording, it would dwarf Frosthaven's in size. So where's the angry comments? Is it just an issue of exposure? There's much less eyes on Aeon Trespass. Plus, maybe people aren't that far in and are still in that phase where they're learning the game and just chalk up any issues that I'm not fully getting the rules yet. Or maybe, to steal a lesson from Truth of the Labyrinth, people don't like it when a negative truth is elucidated. And the fact that Frosthaven had the audacity to diligently catalog its errors cast a spotlight that pincushioned itself, despite the fact that the majority of its errors are at the severity level of slightly altering like one enemy in a scenario, so you might not even notice if you play through it. Yeah, that's what I choose to believe now, since Tainted Grail's errors weren't well documented either, and the negative focus on that game was more on its grindy gameplay, but I digress. You get the point, lots of errors, and the errors are impactful mechanically. However, this, when combined with the game's complexity, leads to a spectacularly tangled mess. Like, I don't think I've ever, in my time reviewing games, seen a thread where a designer comment was in conflict with the official FAQ before the FAQ had to be errata. Like, I was bewildered at how the implementation of a single tech was so botched when I ran into this. Like, there's clearly thought put into the cost of getting this tech, yet the normal way of getting it is bypassed entirely because once you hit the prerequisite Argo knowledge, you unlock a storyverse that just gives it to you anyways. Stop listing mistakes. Stop bringing up issues. Back to the point, a ton of complexity comes in the form of constant exceptions to the rule, which makes things very difficult to quickly internalize. Like, if you were to play a drinking game where you pick a random ruling from the rulebook and drink if that rule has an exception, you'd get shit-faced instantly. If the boss moves through you, suffer the crash effect, but not if it moves through you while doing a sequential attack. Bonus attacks are attacks that chain break, which can interrupt and end an AI card. Oh, and bonus attacks ignore attack responses. So, specifically responses that make the boss do an attack, but not any other responses. The mercy rule is sort of like a chain break, except it only interrupts anything that would have affected just your titan, but anything that affects other titans still resolves. Also, when it comes to interrupts, these work on sequential attacks, but not on simultaneous or zone attacks. And also, zone attacks are like one of the only things in the game that count diagonally for some reason when everything else is orthogonal. So yeah, fuck you, a zone 2 can hit you from 4 spaces away. Body part 3 cards count as 2 wounds, but also they don't go into the wound stack. Instead, you throw in a generic double wound. But wait, if you crit wound, it does go into the wound stack. Exceptions make you have to remember far more than just the A to B ruling. But on top of constant exceptions, there's also an abundance of delayed timings and effects you just have to remember. You can gain Argonaut abilities that you write down but aren't represented in any way like a card in front of you, making them easy to forget. You might have something affect the next battle triggered from the story. That's a unique effect you have to remember instead of like a generic keyword good effect. Sometimes you score critical wounds that introduce a new unique benefit that you have to remember, like ignoring a specific attack. Why design like this? If this were any other game, whenever you check off the next day on the timeline, you'd resolve all your timeline events right then and there. But nope, you have to instead make a mental note of all of them and resolve each at its correctly applicable voyage step. And instead of all these unique effects to write down, everything should be properly defined and suitably encompassed placed within existing keywords and conditions that can then be used for immediately understandable gameplay effects. Like, I never remember that one of my weapons is currently masterworked because I wrote it down. Why is there no masterwork card I can attach to that weapon? There's already attachment cards that exist in the game. All my characters have Nemos cards at various levels that are all written down, so to remember their levels during combat, I just put generic counters on them. And I sometimes forget to update my Dead Titans counter, which, by the way, the game doesn't even make clear that you should be tracking it if a game effect needs it. Note, Dead Titans, I'm pretty sure most people are going to interpret to mean I had 8 Titans and lost 2, I'll update my sheet to say 6. Not literally start counting Dead Titans in total. Look, at the end of the day, this causes this crazily chaotic intersection of issues where if you run into one, it can be hard to diagnose if it's a mistake on the game's part, if it's just poor wording so you don't understand it, if you actually don't understand it, if it's something that is a campaign mechanic that you haven't been introduced to yet, or even just game too complex and it's something you just forgot about and overlooked. Like in Cycle 2, there's tech I see that mentions moving through blockades, and I don't think I've ran into this yet despite there being a bunch of other mechanics involving things you can't move through. And I can't tell for certain because there's no picture of a blockade on the card, so I kind of just have to go with it, possibly even forgetting about it if I finally do run into a blockade. And I need to make this crystal clear, I don't think complexity is inherently a bad thing. Like, I love Root, modern day Yu-Gi-Oh, and a lot of the particularly complicated scenarios and classes in Frosthaven, but it needs to serve a good purpose, and it needs to make sure each different complicated thing is distinct enough from one another to not make it even harder to track and remember, especially in cases where interruptions of already complicated sequences happen. Even more so if that causes you to have to remember to do something later. The fact that Aeon Trespass has so many rules that either barely matter or activate so rarely isn't a good usage case, because rulings are ultimately unclear or erroneous while not offering that many more crunchy decisions. Instead, it just becomes bookkeeping. You're just needlessly tracking stuff, and not even in a satisfying way because of how botched it is with so much uncertainty in rulings. Like using awakenings and nymphs as an example, these are more random mechanics thrown onto really early in the game. Yet they're rarely used unless you're particularly lucky, or unlucky depending on how you look at it. And most of the nymphs have effects you can choose to use if a titan dies. But then you use up a valuable nymph charge, which usually only refresh every time you progress enough to get a new story card. In Cycle 1, I never had to use these, or was in a situation where I wouldn't want to use them because they also activate the adversary, who's basically a harder than normal boss that chases you around the map, and activating means spotting if it's not on the map, or moving if it is. I'm okay with it moving, but not it spawning, and every time I had a guaranteed opportunity to use a nymph, it would have spawned the big dumb thing that chases you. That, or the fight was clearly under control, and a guy just happened to randomly die from bad luck, and I am not gonna blow a nymph charge on that. If I'm gonna be showered with all these oversized cards that I never used, clearly there needs to be ways to make use of them that aren't A, luck-based, and B, purely reactive. Why can't I just spend some really rare resource to instead awaken? And why aren't there nymphs that can be used proactively? Like, because I was generally doing pretty well, I never felt the need to use these despite being a pretty sizable inclusion to the game. I've also yet to draw a Moiros card during combat, and I've drawn a Kratos card like once, which makes me question why they weren't just reworked into special events thrown into the storybook instead of being set up every fight. Oh, and I've never completed a Fated Nemos yet. Like, these mechanics really don't add much to the game, and if anything, dilute it. But back to the point about how all this fiddliness and excess components slash mechanics makes little difference to the overall experience, that to me is a massive red flag that the game did not need to be this overloaded and could have used a lot more streamlining, which not only can then be used to create a sandbox with more depth, but would have also made the dev process more manageable because now there's less things you need to be constantly testing and fixing. Aeon Trespass, in its current state, I highly doubt most people are even playing the same game. Some might be playing a significantly easier slash harder version just based on comments I've read on BGG. I've seen people ignore all responses from bonus attacks instead of just attack responses, which basically trivializes fights if you get lucky gaining bonus attacks. People conflating all the yellow tokens as being condition tokens, so they were more easily removing Despair and Ambrosia. Someone said their tank had 2 shields, which you can't do. There's a lot of folks who didn't know that after doing your move and attack actions, your turn immediately ends and there's no window to activate any of your other free actions. Now, obviously some of those matter a lot, but at the end of the day, they could also not matter if you're just lucky enough, or if you messed something up that made the game harder for you, like not knowing labyrinth tiles when placed in front of and adjacent to the boss doesn't mean the whole tile has to be placed in front of the boss. Like this placement still means in front of and adjacent. The point is, there's most likely too many drastically different, unintentionally house-ruled variations of Aeon Trespass being played right now. That's fine if this was like a TTRPG, but this is a board game and not a gameplay system with a GM to referee everything. On top of that, there's also people just flagrantly house-ruling stuff. Like to bring up the unsolved enigma with really vague wording, it turned out to be much weaker after a designer clarified. And there's literally a dude in a thread saying, fuck that, I ain't playing with the correct effect. Look, ultimately, this rulebook is super mid. I know I've been bringing up con after con, but like, honestly, that's a lot of rulebooks. It's just that this one happens to be 80 pages long. It's got a good flow of information with the great overview of the game and its phases, and some stuff is actually described well. But with all the other issues surrounding Aeon Trespass, like the game's convoluted design and error/vague wording, those aspects make it impossible to make a good rulebook, and I'd identify those as the key problem more than the rulebook. But also, being mid doesn't cut it when applied to a game of this scale. Getting 60% on a 10-question quiz is 4 questions wrong. Getting 60% on a 100 question quiz is 40 questions wrong. Being sometimes clear and sometimes not has greatly expanded consequences at this scale, which is why it's so important to be extra diligent with providing constant clarity and rarely being unclear with huge games. This game has also convinced me that you should never ever put thematic text directly into the paragraphs where the actual rules are. I used to hold the opinion that this was just a preference thing and disregarded it, assuming that people just have different ways of paying attention and learning. But after seeing it in action for a game this big, you're not allowed to do that anymore. Go put thematic texts in a side box. That works for everyone. If I saw that this style of rulebook actually worked and people online were at large clicking super well with the rules, I wouldn't have changed my stance on this. But clearly that wasn't the case, and it just muddles information while learning and for referencing. Alright. Gameplay cons. I feel like some of the component cons were bordering on gameplay cons anyways when talking about how the mechanics hurt the component clarity. But this game's issues are so intersectional and entrenched in its design that it's hard to cleanly isolate them. Let's go over how Aeon Trespass's incentives and design are ultimately dysfunctional because of how they clash with each other. Combining an extreme amount of randomness with an extreme amount of diligent balancing and complexity doesn't make much sense. Randomness is usually used as a design tool to obscure information in the game, such as hiding power levels or whether the game state is currently favorable/unfavorable. Generally, this is done with the intent of either hiding the information horizon so that players must play around imperfect information and outcomes, or to provide suspense and novelty to your actions. Where am I going with this? Well, Aeon Trespass has extreme degrees of randomness, and your information horizon is microscopic, basically always limited to your immediate action. Now remember how I said this game is very clearly well playtested? It's apparent a ton of work went not just into all the different progression systems like resource scaling, boss levels, strict timeline battles, etc. to keep you and bosses on an even playing field, but also the progression of individual fights with the relation between wounds and rage. With all this work done to balance the bosses and players, it's very often that it all gets thrown out the window because of the extreme range of possible outcomes. That level of balancing diligence makes more sense in a lower randomness game where the high level of polish gets the shine. Not a game where you can randomly instantly kill the boss off a random bonus attack halfway through the fight. All those systems and complexity don't matter at all if the dice say so, which is the inherent risk you're onboarding by choosing to have binary pass-fail outcomes attached to dice in your game. That doesn't mean high randomness is inherently a bad thing, but it does mean that you have to account for what this does to your players that will fall into the farther ends of the bell curve of outcomes. When including high randomness in your game, you gotta accept that some small amount of players are just gonna be statistical extremes that will either fail everything or pass everything. And there's not much you can do about that, so whatever, it's just an inherent problem of the system. However, Aeon Trespass actually includes mechanisms that further narrow the bell curve instead of widening it, which again would be fine if you're looking to make the game a goofy, lol, I'm so random XD fiesta. But it's very clear that's not what this game is trying to be. There are so many possible things to run into that take some someone who is otherwise in the middle of the bell curve and just shoves them towards an extreme end when it comes to outcomes. Let's just look at Dread as an example. If you receive this condition, you are now immediately forced to feast or famine, because getting a wound with it basically makes it so that for the rest of the fight you don't have to worry about attack rolls anymore with a +2 to everything, which can even nullify the penalty of getting another Dread later on and then cause you to further snowball, or you become a useless idiot who can rarely get attacks in. Is there a counterplay to this? Sure, you can try and set up the Titan with Dread for a good attack, but it's never guaranteed because 1, it's a dice roll, and 2, there's so many other random factors that can help or mess it up, like the boss behaving unexpectedly, or maybe a trauma card dumped in a bunch of opening tokens, or maybe the last battle's Dread gave your character a Fated Memos that prevents you from using opening tokens, which makes future Dreads even harder to deal with. In case it wasn't obvious, none of that makes for thoughtful counterplay. It provides tension, sure, but shouldn't be conflated with the type of uncertainty that comes from trying to find the correct play amidst plentiful potential options. And as you may have noticed, that was really snowbally, which tends to happen a lot from pushing outcomes towards extreme ends. Having a Titan die in the first round severely limits options for how you want to rotate aggro and who's positioned where to set up the next Titan, which is going to make it easier for another Titan to die. And getting an early crit that debuffs the boss makes the whole thing easier. You even get this hilarious meme cannon in Cycle 2 that on a 50-50 lets you jumpstart your tempo against the boss by a few turns. And it's crazy the difference I felt in battles where this fired in the first turn and those where it didn't. Like, I don't think it's a good sign that I never really had 2 Titans die in a fight. It's usually just 0 or 1, with the 1 being someone randomly dying at the end. Or for the few times I did lose, it's an unlucky slaughter of 3 or 4 that snowballed out of control. Or even the bits of good luck towards the end just don't matter because they didn't happen earlier. There's also so many binary outcomes that are immediate extremities. Like oboe draws being a 50-50 on dying is already crazy. So much so that in Cycle 2, they decided to just make oboes usually kill you. Then the wound system is also so all in for that attack since HP doesn't exist in this game. So your attack is either going to do the wound or it won't, which is way less likely to average out than when there's constant random HP damage from attacks. Again, this is done purposely to keep the fights unfavorable if you want to DPS race the boss, but it is wacky that no matter how beefed up you are, even if you were fighting a low level boss, you still gotta deal 10 wounds. So your higher damage weapons ain't really making the battle that much faster. Whereas bosses can always be steadily threatening because players take actual damage on top of a plethora of insta-kill effects. If we wanted to avoid snowballing while still having hilarious random outcomes, either narrow the distance between the extreme ends or provide way more recompense for overly swingy effects. Like heroic death kills you as a really early major trauma, but you do a bonus attack, which isn't that much of a condolence when you can also just get bonus attacks normally through trauma. So if you're trying to make this particularly heroic, it needs to do a little more, like all other Titans gaining rage as they're inspired, or maybe the boss gets an additional single wound. Likewise, hilariously good effects like straight up bonus attacks or gaining rage could do something like getting knocked down afterwards to slightly stall this Titan who's now capable of outpacing the boss growth with the early rage tempo. This isn't even constrained within individual battles. If a fight early in a cycle happens to randomly reward you with a secret weapon from a critical, that game has now gotten significantly easier. Doesn't even need to be that extreme, just someone who scores a few more crits on level 3 body cards will be awarded with a rare resource called a core that's used to craft unique Titans, and even further upgrade secret gear. Then some of the randomly gained Mnemos cards are clearly better than others. Like Death Follows, it's one of the few sources of extra damage on command that exists in the game, and will commonly just end fights on your terms by consistently dealing the finishing blow on a level 3 body part. Likewise, if you run into the adversary too early in the cycle and get really unlucky, resulting in them making you lose a bunch of gear, sure, the game's resource systems are actually well designed enough to be able to play through that eventually because of the scaling resources, but it will most likely put you at enough of a resource deficit that you'll find it much harder to have the little bit of excess that can be used to trade into the gear you actually want for the next few bosses, which manifests as only being able to craft what you can from what you have. And that can make the game a lot harder if your Titans aren't able to fulfill the variety of different roles needed to make a cohesive team composition. Look, I get that you can do everything right and still lose, or do everything wrong and still win, that's just life, yada yada. This isn't life. This is a board game that's apparently trying to be Dark Souls. But in Souls games, if you do everything right, you win every time. And you don't get super powerful stuff randomly, you have to know where to find them. Which probably means you already know what's going on, and so you're going to use that powerful stuff to blast through or skip early levels to get to the hard stuff stuff. In Aeon's Trespass, you're locked to scheduled timeline battles. Hopefully this argument makes sense that all this complexity doesn't work well with all the extreme outcomes of randomness. Like, come on, you can randomly have a Nemos that can at a random time make your guy invincible during the next fight if the boss doesn't have text somewhere that says you outright die. However, just because there's all this wacky wahoo nonsense in the game doesn't mean there's no thoughtfulness behind your decisions. The pros clearly highlighted all these ways you can manipulate and interact with the game's systems, right? In fact, there's clearly an optimal way to play the game, and it's possible to make the boss miss almost every single one of its attacks. If you have access to the reflex keyword, you can move on the boss's turn whenever this icon pops up, which means that you can just have a Titan stand away from the boss at their maximum move distance, and when the boss takes its turn, if it's targeting this Titan, the Titan reflexes away, the boss moves up and can't reach them, so the attack whiffs. Okay, but how do you control who's the target? You can either be super big brain and just do it through manually adjusting rage and positioning as needed, or you can just use an item like this. Just set up 2 Titans with this and pinball the boss back and forth till it's dead, which sucks all the tension out, and all the randomness is usually doing then is making the fight possible to take much longer or much faster based on how well you roll your attacks. Emphasis on usually, because every now and then the AI cards can have something weird, but on average the fight is super controlled. Where am I going with this? Well, isn't it really weird how there's all this wacky random goofiness, but the optimal way to play the game is to actually bypass a huge part of the randomness entirely? We could have had something really interesting if the game focused more on including ways to influence positioning, timings, and facing directions, while also making these all reactions on the boss's turn, and then top it off by giving the boss even more complicated attacks for this super crunchy ability sequencing puzzle. But we also could have had the most entertaining spectacle boss battler ever if it just all in on goofy random shenanigans. Instead, these two gameplay philosophies are constantly making the other worse. Like, the fights feel so bizarre if you're perfectly playing it, but then suddenly the boss randomly does a thing that can't be reacted to, and then it instantly kills a Titan from bad luck. And likewise, if for the first half the fight just happened to turn into some Looney Tunes shit with Titans flying across the board constantly, falling off the vantage point a bunch, and a ton of crits and random bonus attacks are happening. But then during the last bit of the fight, none of that happens at all, and it just feels anticlimactic as you rigidly bread and butter it to death. Invalidating a bunch of planning with random bullshit, good or bad, basically just wastes your planning time. And being stupid with tank and spanking gets really boring during droughts where none of the funny random stuff is happening. This all comes together to make so many of the game's systems actually incredibly misleading or just outright useless. Again, not a great use of complexity. Even something as core as your Titan's health is a bait because so many AI level 3 cards essentially just one-shot you anyways. This isn't even unbalanced, which is the funny part, because you have 4 goons versus the boss having 1 turn, so it's gotta be threatening somehow. But what this functionally means is a battle that was full-on optimizing the boss into whiffing most of its attacks is pretty much still just as dangerous later in the fight to the Titans as the battle where everyone holds W while properly shifting aggro. Assuming the whole W battle had average luck with decent armor, so everything in the battle is averagely hurt, the game even wants to reward taking a bunch of damage by providing bonuses on certain items if you're hurt enough, which you almost never get to use while reflex evading because in those fights you've taken damage anywhere from medium to none or you're dead, unless you're lucky with oboe draws. I'd understand the inclusion of damage thresholds if there were more mechanics that had you take damage as a cost, but at the moment your damage taken is decently random in between random armor rolls and the boss's random attack rolls, and is otherwise a weak imitation of the brilliant design between rage and boss escalation. And this one really gets to me when it comes to misleading. Losing a fight barely even matters at all. The only punishment besides having Titans die is that you gain a Doom token. Cool, I progress a cycle loss condition by 1/30th. You know what else can get you a Doom token? Moving onto a random ass tile. Yeah, clearly excellent usage of mechanics as a narrative tool to sell me the importance of these battles. Obviously you can't lose too many battles because you gotta give your campaign some leeway as it's gonna be generating Doom tokens regularly on its own. So the battles matter in the long run. Wait, no, there's tech to nullify Doom gain. Okay, cool, great, awesome, wow, not a problem unless you're hilariously unlucky since it's an Argo test that can be re-rolled. So you're telling me that I was actually unrewarded for playing well and there was no reason to have my fights take around like 2+ hours each from overthinking everything and barely getting hit when I could have just blown through the combat much faster by just getting all the tank items, juggling aggro, and holding W to get my battles much closer to the advertised 90 minutes? I could have lost like half my battles and still won Cycle 1 given that I was usually capped out on Titans and was nowhere close to losing via Doom. This is a first where, upon looking back at my experience, I'm thinking I should have been playing the game worse actually. And the biggest kicker when it comes to the clashing rigidness and complexity is how all of that complexity just doesn't add up to much. Just the act of attacking is really complex for not offering that much in decision space. Recall how I said attacking is really fiddly component-wise with all the adjusting and rolling and shuffling it causes. So what do you get mechanically out of all that? Well, not much. You're usually only gonna move and attack on a turn. But then that one attack is so loaded with keywords and extra effects that it makes me question why some of them weren't separated into entirely new actions you can take on your turn. There could have been a plethora of options on a turn and tons of ways to sequence everything. But instead it's all consolidated into one attack that then triggers your repositions, your vaults, your motivates. What this causes on a turn-by-turn basis is not just less decision making, but also less character expression, because everything unique about you has to center around your one attack. Sequencing your actions properly for maximum effect is heavily dampened in this game because the sequencing is already done for you during your attack at these two ability windows. There's also a ton of complexity in that lots of effects are highly situational, making it really easy to never use your dozens of abilities that proc off a critical while you're at high damage. Hell, it's also really easy to just outright forget about them. What actually causes much more decision making is the immediate tactics of playing around the boss's constantly emergent behaviors. As a result, the sequence you make all four Titans take their turns matters so much more than how any individual decides to do their own turn because of this constant reactive play. You know what that means, right? This game is actually just a solo game. Probably 2 players max, unless you want to open yourself up to mandatory group project thinking or quarterbacking, because if all 4 Titans aren't acting as one, you will fuck up everything. From small things like putting in unoptimal Kratos tokens for the next Titan, to huge things like causing someone to waste their turn because you're blocking them, or even preventing proper aggro control and wasting someone's reflex setup. The gameplay in Aeon Trespass enables full information of everyone's options on top of being overly complex and generally difficult. So if anyone at the table is just lacking a little, they're not going to be engaging in the shot calls much, if at all. But also, the mechanics in here attack the premise of group play from all sorts of angles. There's a lot of conditions that will cause you to skip your turn. It's rare but possible for a Titan to die before they even take their first turn. Anecdotally, that happened 3 times to me through cycle 1. And straight up, it's not uncommon to die in the first few rounds. Then your group has to be really careful about how they spend resources because everything's shared. Everyone has to agree on how these scarce special Titans are used. Everyone has to agree on how these shared Argo abilities are spent. There's a lot of reading from the storybook, and there's no narration app as far as I'm aware. So have fun straining people's voices reading passages aloud when you back-to-back trigger an event, an adventure, a story progression, and a Nemos. Actually, the Nemos brings me to how there's a lot of things in this game that were in fact designed around multiple players, but they are unfortunately absolutely not worth going through all the aforementioned issues entrenched into the design. Whenever you progress your character's Nemos card enough from doing adventures, you do a Nemos adventure, which the rulebook encourages you to read individually because they're highly personal to your character. Not gonna lie, these are pretty generic. Don't see a reason why I'd hide these from the group and make them have to wait a few minutes while I read the story myself. There's a few that actually do cool and unique stuff or even tie back into the main story, but they're mostly just what you'd expect from their names and aren't really adding anything to the plot. But yeah, aside from private Nemos reading, there are things like solo tests instead of group tests during adventures, as well as deciding who to make the party leader who calls the shots. And even this keyword peril, which means the party leader can't consult the group for a decision. Your characters can even form a bond with a specific Titan if a random event calls for it. And you can have your Titans personally named. But at the end of the day, these are all just cute little add-ons that don't add anything substantial aside from reminding you that this game was in fact designed to play with the group despite doing it poorly on a fundamental level. Which is a huge shame because the game could have had a foundation built from the ground up to be better for group play. Toning down on the Titan CC, give dead players something to do with the Argo abilities, maybe even have a revive mechanic. But for the more nuanced issues like escalation play patterns, maybe instead of the boss shuffling in new, stronger cards constantly and the Titans all having to sequence turns perfectly to adjust to the freshly shuffled decks, this could have been something like no level cards, there's just the whole deck, and the boss getting stronger is just modifier tokens that buff their stats. Then have their targeting conditions and body part responses be hinted at on the backs of AI cards as the way to gauge threat. That way there's no more constantly fucking pausing the game to shuffle something. But it also means everyone is way more freeform with their turns. You're not going to mess up the boss's behavior for your team if you choose to attack while there's a level 1 AI card on top. You're not going to potentially ruin someone's targeting plan just by being in front of the boss because now it's possible to see if the AI card back hints it's doing something else. You don't have to worry about making the discard pile bigger with your low range attack and worsening the odds of newly shuffled cards being live and hurting your team. I could go all day with this. Alas, that's not what this game is, and because everyone has to act as one, it really dampens individuals standing out mechanically with both agency plus autonomy. And no, being lucky and critting or awakening doesn't count. Those are entirely random and not in your control, so they aren't cool decisions that you made. This lack of expression is further shown in how this is one of those games where your items matter way more than your Titan, which by the way makes it really easy in solo play to get the Titans mixed up if you swap a bunch of gear around, but you've been used to one Titan using a certain weapon for a while. Anyways, your damage is almost entirely up to your weapon, and because everything is so heavily centered around the act of attacking, any uniqueness that comes from your Titan plays second fiddle to the weapon that they have equipped. In fact, if anything, those abilities are really just things that make you attack better, either in stats or quantity. The only time you're doing an actual new attack ability that isn't with your weapon comes from awakenings. But otherwise, unique Titans are fundamentally just another flavor of slapping more keywords onto your weapon's attack. Again, this is balanced and all, given how the tech and gear progression keeps your craftable weapon efficacy perfectly in line with boss difficulty, but it does mean that it's not you who's getting stronger, it's your weapons, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the way this game does it dumps most of its eggs in one basket because a Titan's not going to be running around with like 10 different weapons that all provide different ways to attack, which would have given much more actual decision making individually. This lack of actions also makes counterplay rather restrictive. Like, this isn't a game where upon receiving a condition you can find ways to cleverly play around it by using different options. For example, getting Dread or Frenzy isn't going to cause you to avoid doing certain actions from your toolbox of options. It's just binary, like, oh, I guess I should or shouldn't attack this turn, which is the consequence of designing everything around just one attack. In fact, the best solution is typically to just brute force your way through it with items that outright nullify the mechanics. Most items are designed to be hyper-situational silver bullet solutions, and there's rarely items like this where they have not only generally useful abilities against all bosses instead of a few, but also give you actually different options for how you want to use it. What this causes is a system that puts arguably more weight into preparing for battle over actual battle mechanics, since the gear matters so much due to lack of possible actions on a Titan's turn. And like previously mentioned with how the group shares resources and item pools, this is all just another nail in the coffin for how Aeon Trespass fails at providing engaging gameplay for everyone during group play, since your possibilities in battle are entirely up to what the group decides to craft. Ultimately, there are two different directions I can envision that would make Aeon Trespass more cohesive. I already sort of mentioned potentially doubling down on the super tactical, extremely complicated side of the game to make it more puzzly by giving way more actions in a turn aside from move/attack. But if that were combined with making more aspects guaranteed, like skipping attack rolls and having only damage rolls, the gameplay would then turn into carefully sequencing all of your potential actions for maximum efficiency. But the other potential solution could be just leaning way harder into the randomness in order to promote constant spectacle. Throw in way more trauma cards because 15 per deck is too small. Constantly design abilities that have a chance to do something ridiculous. Give the bosses even more things that might randomly kill you or randomly enable you to debuff it for the rest of the battle. Then, in order to prevent the game from becoming brain dead with no decision making, provide even more ways to enable dice rerolls and disable the one reroll per die limit that currently exists, so that it becomes a game about positioning and carefully managing your wide variety of dice reroll sources. Currently, because Fate is both a general resource for abilities and a reroll mechanic, it's fairly premium and usually too valuable to constantly use on rerolls once you have a ton of gear. But if we introduced mechanics like, say, items that hold charges to use on rerolls that have to be regenerated in certain ways, like maybe one needs reaching certain rage levels, another gains a charge every time you're the boss's target, right? Stuff that encourages engaging play patterns. You'll still keep the gameplay thoughtful, though under that design of making the randomness even more swingy and having even more rerolls, it would probably require death to be less punishing, which if you're trying to incentivize people to do goofy shit is definitely a good thing. On the topic of randomness, this game is ideal for solo play, but playing solo makes the novelty of randomness wear off extremely quickly when there's no rowdy group to revel in the absurdity. Like, sure, I found it funny the first few times I instantly died or did random bonus attacks that stopped the boss's turn, but now it just feels annoying after the dozenth time. Like with tiny trauma decks, I'm gonna see everything in them very quickly. As for the more constant dice rolling from attacks, everything, even huge criticals, are now just run-of-the-mill instead of hype. But these all felt drastically different when I was playing with my friends, and the spectacle of stupid crits crits plus hilariously unideal misses immediately returned. Gameplay cons part 2. Oh my god, this game is grindy. Also some balance issues. Why is no one calling this game grindy? A common complaint keeps showing up in negative reviews. There's too much mandatory combat that doesn't do anything for the story. You're almost never sent to combat via the storybook. It's all just set timeline battles every 6 days. Doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing, it's just stop, you're fighting now. Reminder, each fight is around an hour and a half normally. For me, it was usually 2 hours because I took longer with my turns, and there's all the setup you do every fight on top of usually rethinking my loadout every fight whenever I got new stuff. Plus, if anyone's just been affected by a campaign mechanic or Nemo's change. This means that after doing 20 something fights in cycle 1, that's already 40 something hours of combat, and probably a few hours where it's literally just doing stuff like shuffling and setup. Okay, so what? You do a bunch of combat, big deal. If you enjoy the combat, no problem, right? Well, this isn't Gloomhaven where the point of the game is mostly just combat with light storytelling going on. This is more like Tainted Grail, where the campaign mechanics and story text are incredibly vast, meaning there's stuff you should be tracking and actively keeping your thoughts with as you explore and adventure, lest you fuck something up during travel pathing or story decisions. The worst barrage of combat I've ever gotten was in 2 days I had 4 fights. 1 from timeline, 1 from the story, 1 from the adversary, and another from a random ambush exploration card. Let me tell you, after all that, I had no idea what the hell I was even doing anymore. This should just be flat out impossible in a game that has a lot of adventuring and story going on unless the combat is also delivering the story. But no, the combat serves almost no purpose in the overall picture of the campaign. The unity of combat and voyage is so non-existent, you're arguably just playing 2 entirely different games. And not in a good way. Like quite literally, you've set up detective on one table, and for some reason, every hour in, you stop to go play a game of, I don't know, fucking Spirit Island for 2 hours before coming back. The resources you gain from wounding body parts are exclusively used for crafting more gear, which means yes, fundamentally speaking, you're being blocked from making progress just to chase a number going up that's only going to be used in combat. That's definitely just grinding. This is bewildering to me. Like in Tainted Grail and Frosthaven, the resources from combat go directly back into being utilized in the campaign. Yet meanwhile in Aeon Trespass, resources you get from both exploring and combat just go back into combat. Yeah, you heard me right. Even the resources you get from exploring are mostly used in combat, not in developing tech or something, because as you may recall, tech is just passively unlocked for free on predetermined days. Big deal, the game is extremely combat focused. If you know that going in and like the combat, no problem, right? Well, as someone who actually does enjoy the solo combat gameplay, they're really trying to make it less fun. There are a lot of repeat fights, which is another tendency that pops up a lot in grindy games. Like, I think all the bosses are really cool, but I'm much less impressed by them after seeing the same AI and body part cards over and over again. Plus, this game encourages you to fight the same boss over and over again instead of giving yourself more variety because of how the tech upgrade paths work. Since a lot of the best gear is obtained from tech locked behind not only encountering a specific boss at a specific level, but also unlocking all the previous tech related to that boss. If you want to stay ahead of the game and go deeper into upgrade trees earlier, you have to commit your timeline tech developments down that boss's path so that once you unlock the latest level of that boss's tech, you can start crafting state-of-the-art gear right away. And remember, a lot of that gear is built specifically to counter that boss. So guess who you're gonna be fighting more of if you want to be optimizing. This is all particularly inflexible for experimenting with new gear within your power level, because you're not gonna have enough excess resources to craft all the shiny new stuff. Because if you did, you'd also be able to save up to immediately get higher tier items, whose costs are very intentionally scaled to be out of reach for you until you fight the higher level bosses with their scaling resource drops. Thus, you have to be really intentional about what's being unlocked and crafted, and then be prepared to drop it relatively quickly once you unlock the higher tier thing, which is just so slash and burn on top of doing constant resource accounting. Like, believe me, I've tried to break the cycle and get more than I was supposed to by doing dumb shit like purposely trying to deal 11 wounds instead of 10, plus constantly bringing carving gear, which has a chance of generating extra resources on wounds. And while I was never hurting for boss resources, what I was actually lacking all the time were all the resources you get from exploring, which as far as I'm aware has no weird dumb thing you could be doing to squeeze out more of them. Like, if I were allowed to trade my boss resources for the exploration ones, maybe I could have squeezed out an extra item or two every so often, which honestly doesn't even sound that bad. Why can't players do that? Or at least let players dismantle dismantle old unused gear into exploration resources. Like, come on, why am I sitting around with like 20 unused items later in a cycle? But also, the existence of the Pursuer, who's the adversary that can make you permanently lose gear, is enough of a resource tax that I highly doubt throwing the players a bit of a bone when it comes to giving them resources is gonna mess the progression up. Okay, what was the point of the item tangent? I'm trying to reinforce the case that the combat is grindy and repetitive, but aren't I saying that it's actually not that repetitive because of the constant gear upgrading? Here's where I put all of this together. Boss levels and new gear that you're stuck with for that level doesn't change enough of the gameplay to justify this much mandatory combat. I've already said before that the items are your true source of power while also not offering that much in the way of new gameplay options. And so in order to feel actually tangible decision-making difference, you need to be swapping out rather large quantities of items across all your titans instead of only like 1 or 2 new upgrades after a fight. Remember, the main point of this segment is bringing up how the game makes you grind, and this steady trickle of gear that slowly but surely makes you stronger without doing much in the way of variety is doing just that. Combined with how bosses tend to mostly just get stat increases on level ups, and that means your playstyle isn't even changing much, especially if you're reflex evade spamming. Reflex being so good also makes carrying specialized boss counter items nice, but unnecessary contingencies, and you're mostly just chasing number go up gear. Wait, but aren't these new abilities on the boss? That's not just stat increases. Well, I don't know about you, but the boss cards never change, and those are the backbone of how they behave. Then for the traits, Hecaton and Labyrinthos only get something game-changing at level 2, but then everything else barely matters. Like, cool, more forced movement distance. That doesn't really change anything if you're just reflexing away from knockbacks, which is also what you do with this new map setup. Labyrinthos, I kid you not, the level 3 and 4 traits combined have mattered maybe like once across all the times I've fought it at those levels. There's not many responses with Trample, and the level 4 ability only matters the first time you fight it when your gear is weak by level 4 standards. But then the instant you craft the weapons for its level, it basically just never happens. Also, can we stop with giving bosses extra attacks at fixed intervals as their new level up thing? That's not even a new mechanic. It's either just another stat increase, or okay, make sure when you set it off you have a titan with reflex ready to be the target and move out of the way. Look, the point is the way you play against the bosses doesn't change enough to be constantly fighting them throughout the cycle. God, the theater does such a better job with this. Talk about drastic changes. Oh yeah, another thing that doesn't help with repetitiveness is that the boss arenas stay the exact same the vast majority of the time. Also, I want to point out that the terrain tiles are mostly differently sided. And if you're thinking this is a secret component con in the gameplay section, you are completely wrong, because in this case, since your setup is always the same, I literally just leave the needed tiles out and use them every time. Like, if there was a game that could really use some procedurally generated maps, it'd be this one. Just need some kind of rule saying you can't die in the first turn in case the randomized setup causes the boss to immediately kill you. And to further my point, the most upvoted house rule on BGG is the one for an auto battler to skip fights. Yeah, it turns out people don't want to refight a bunch of bosses they're already familiar with if they're restarting their cycle from a loss. Then to top it off, it really sucks how I wasn't even looking forward to the final battle of cycle 1 because I already fought the final boss 5 times beforehand, with the only difference being that in prior fights you can win with less wounds. So you're still experiencing the boss doing all the exact same things as it would normally do in the final battle. Like, really ask yourself, what game makes you fight the final boss unchanged this much before the final showdown? Look, the best systems are the ones that give the players a ton of control over how they want to engage with the game without overwhelming them with options up front. You don't need to dumb down your game if you want it to be huge. You just have to make it more accommodating to as many players as possible who are in fact capably wanting to play your game. There's ways to design the game to accommodate both story-focused players and the battle addicts, on top of giving the game more options and variety to not make it repetitive like I've already mentioned. But let's focus on properly managing combat frequency. You ever hear of a concept called side questing? You know, the thing that is optional additional content and is also for some reason not in this game. Do you immediately see where I'm going with this? Instead of timeline battles, just make it possible to be tasked with killing bosses from adventures, which immediately solves this issue because if someone doesn't want to fight them, they don't have to do it. And the people who do want to just completes every single side quest. This would also be a good way to actually incorporate the battles into the campaign mechanics. Like, wow, there's actually a reason for this fight instead of it happening out of nowhere. I won and one of the factions was super happy about that, so I gained a reputation as a reward. Like, come on. It's baffling how this game has the perfect excuse to have giant boss monsters monsters constantly rearing their ugly heads in the story, in that they're literally constant natural disasters that can then exacerbate existing issues within the world's factions, which can provide so many ways in which you're tasked to kill bosses. Instead, the bosses are rarely mentioned in the story. Like, why is nobody talking about giant monsters destroying everything and how you constantly run in to kill them? Then to keep the boss difficulty balanced, just do stat scaling based on your strongest gear. The theater mode already weighs everything by power level within their cycle. Surely this can be done instead of precise timeline placement of railroaded tech in battles. If you want to be extra safe with the design, reward gear tech from battles instead of the timeline to keep player and boss progression 1-to-1. And if you're not doing enough fights to be powerful enough for the final battle, fuck it, you get some gear to use that's solid, but obviously worse than the dude who grinded out the best stuff from nonstop fighting and probably also has secret weapons. Point is, there's a bunch of ways to design the quantity of battles to be flexible, as well as solutions to any issues that may come up. Plus, with scaling, you can introduce difficulty sliders to further make the game more accommodating to all skill levels. Finally, one last random thing to bring up about grindy repetitiveness before moving on. There's a rare resource called Sisyphus Tears that lets you redo a fight. Why do these not just provide a one-time powerful effect like Awakening or maximizing the dice results for a roll? The only times I'd want to use this is when a fight goes particularly south from terrible luck, but you shouldn't have to redo the entire hour plus fight from that. Let me just guarantee a really lucky thing to swing the momentum back in my favor. Besides, when resetting a fight, I might not even remember what everyone's starting rage, fate, and danger were, because they aren't going to be zero if an adventure caused you to take damage, on top of remembering any other weird battle effects caused from the campaign. As they are now, Tears I basically never used because not only did I rarely lose, but defeat is so inconsequential that I never felt like I needed to win this fight. Next up, balance cons. The biggest one is the implementation of reflex, which is arguably the strongest keyword in the entire game. And because it's on gear, it ends up invalidating tons of build decisions. Like as an example, when I tried using impetus breakers, it just felt like I was using a worse version of reflex, because I could just dodge out of the way of most knockbacks entirely. There's just so many situations that could have been disastrous and can be entirely nullified by reflex. Not to mention, reflex enables outright negation of damage from AI attacks via evading out of range. Yet it's also very clear that the game is balanced around reflex. Like, there's very intentional reaction window placement, so it's not like busted or anything, but rather a quintessential part of gameplay. Okay, if that was the case, why wasn't reflex just codified into the rules as something you can normally do instead of being put onto gear cards and limiting build options as a result? The rulebook even encourages you to get support gear as soon as possible, but what they're really trying to hint at is to get reflex. I'd go so far as to argue that the entire first half of Cycle 1 is just a tutorial because you're playing an entirely different, simplified game prior to unlocking reflex. And like all your early fights basically just boil down to run up and hit the boss over and over again until it dies, with the main decision making being super basic and managing who's going to be the priority target in order to spread out damage. Aeon Trespass is already super heavy, so what's the point of all the brain dead combat for the first dozen hours? Surely anyone who's going to be playing Aeon Trespass can immediately handle the expanded decision making that comes from being able to move on the boss's turn. Like, the tutorial is so unbelievably unrepresentative of how the combat actually plays once you're properly geared up. Next, opening tokens are really weak in comparison to break tokens. You very quickly realize at a certain point that you're just outright unable to score wounds without break tokens, which means that break tokens are mandatory and openings are just nice to have. As a result, anytime there's an option to pick either an opening or a break, I almost never pick openings unless there's already some break tokens up, or I have a multi-attack dice weapon that rolls significantly more dice than usual, which is kinda rare. They're usually only better by like one red dice. And red dice are so likely to not do jack shit without breaks. What's really confounding is that the game clearly realizes this. Like, there's a Fated Nemos that disables openings. There ain't one that disables breaks. And there will occasionally be options between two openings and one break, which is a far more reasonable decision to consider. So I'd argue that needs to be the norm instead of 1-1. This is also related to how I've found that weapons with only one attack die perform on average so much better than ones with multiple attack dice, unless you can find a way to really overload on both opening and break tokens or precision plus ones from other random sources. They're also really inconsistent at purposefully fully missing if you want to rage farm without body part responses, and they're inconsistent at getting in the big hit when you really need it. Reminder that each attack die reroll is one fate, so rerolling one die is much less costly than having to do 2 or 3. Then for some defensive issues, speccing into evasion has yielded much worse results for me than tanking. You just can't get enough bonus evasion expectation for this to ever be reliable unless the incoming attack has easy evade values. But there's tons of attacks that are basically just auto hits with 9s and 10s needed to evade. I had a Maze Runner Titan get annihilated even when standing on a city, so there's +3 to evade, and I had 3 rerolls. But nope, still took most of the damage and got an unlucky trauma death. Thanks, game. Apparently, after looking this up, evasion builds aren't really a thing until later cycles anyways, and even then, they're super situational because of the reliance on certain terrain and boss tendencies. So thanks for the unique Cycle 1 Titan that's not even that good in Cycle 1. Meanwhile, tanking is in general super solid because it's not only easy to reach high values of damage reduction, it's also way more reliable, not just for consistency, but also because you can typically be standing anywhere and it works just fine. Like, you can't full on tank and spend constantly, well, at least consistently, unless you're really lucky. Having a tank as a backup for when you can't pull off a good reflex works great. Like, it's really not uncommon to be reducing huge hits like 6 down to 2 with a block shield and some armor that rolls tons of defense dice. Campaign cons. Okay, the voyage phase isn't really exploration. It's actually just a bunch of upkeep that randomly gives you stuff, whether it be resources or adventures. So long as you're moving to a new tile that's not currently on the board, you are making progress. What kind of exploration game takes out all the novelty of discovery from exploring? There's no named cities where the game delves into their culture and geographical relevance. No notable locations, nothing. It's all just generic, nameless places whose only purpose is to serve as backdrops and vistas for your voyage. Like, why am I able to start an adventure on one end of the map, and then throughout the adventure, I'm at entirely different ends of the map, while sometimes interacting with named characters who definitely aren't wandering around like me. That or the adventure will say this is a Minoan settlement. Wow, I'm in Hornsworn territory game-wise. Like, I somewhat joked how in Tainted Grail you could ignore all the gameplay and just read the book. But even then, you'd still have to set up the map and move around for full context of certain locations and how their geography matters. Especially when NPCs tell you something important about a certain spot that can help you make progress. Aeon Trespass, I'd argue you literally can still get the full picture by only reading the book and story/doom cards while disregarding the entire game. There's occasionally times from the story where you have to go to a specific spot, but that spot is chosen randomly, so you aren't getting any world building lore from King Minos' secret city because it can spawn at a ton of different places and only exists as a set piece for a cool story moment. Like, do you know how pointless moving around feels when you're trying to generate progress tokens to further your story card, instead of actually exploring specific places to look around and clue yourself into where you're supposed to be going? The first thing you're tasked with doing is finding King Minos, and you make progress regardless of where the hell you are. There's no spot where he actually is. Plus, when you finally get to meet him, he's located in a random ass spot in another one of his secret constructions that also happens to be city-sized. Dude, you are not going to be able to hide shit that big. What the hell? Just give me some world building and culture, please, anything. I'm begging you, stop making this a story only about individuals, please, God. Individuals exist in a society that shapes them, bro, come on. But also because you're only moving one space a day, it makes the adversary mechanic really one-dimensional because it's always just going to eventually catch up with you, and there's never this fun risk-reward dance you're doing with it because you're rarely forced to have to go anywhere that it may be blocking. The designers even made sure adversaries are harder to path around because they tie-break movement by picking what's more inconvenient for you based on the cycle map. Like Cycle 1, it goes horizontal because the map is more horizontal, whereas Cycle 2 is more vertical, so it likes moving vertically too. Coming from Tainted Grail, which has a way more robust wandering enemy system that provides a gajillion different outmaneuvering tactics because you can move around so much, this adversary hunting you down feels so lackluster and honestly would have been better off just being a timeline event, especially because running into it too early can potentially set you back greatly in power level from the gear destruction ability. If Aeon Trespass actually had movement instead of the snail's paced one move then 8 steps of upkeep, wandering enemies could have been expanded upon greatly, possibly even being able to replace timeline battles altogether if every boss had its own tiny version it could wander around the map, which would also better sell that they are in fact threatening creatures that roam the lands, destroying everything instead of these impromptu, consequenceless, tall grass Pokemon battles on the timeline. And to further showcase how where you explore doesn't matter, Cycle 1 makes heavy usage of these tokens called labyrinthian temples, which block cities and turn them into spots that give you a doom token instead. I never interacted with this because I had no reason to ever travel backwards, especially because you aren't allowed to use the same city you just visited for its benefits. Okay, now for some some minor campaign gameplay cons, like how the Centimane's puzzle in Cycle 1 can give you potentially wrong information that you have to figure out is wrong. First of all, I initially just thought this was a mistake given this game's plethora of errors, again showing how purposely vague instructions can become dysfunctional if your game has too many mistakes. But second, if you're gonna do this, tell the player that this is a possibility in the first place, like at least put in a verse saying, this was a dud the first time, instead of having nothing and making me have to look this up. And for Cycle 1, if you choose to start without the tutorial, it gives you less than what you start with coming out of the tutorial. Why is it not equal? Like if you wanted to, you could just speedrun the tutorial story to get an extra Titan, an additional exploration draw, as well as some reputation shifts. Meanwhile, the default starting stuff for Cycle 2 is really generous. Like you start with one of each of the unique Cycle 1 Titans. I was really considering just doing a fresh Cycle 2 start because it had very slightly better weapons than what I had, and I didn't have all the Cycle 1 tech, which it also gives, until I read that you have to randomly mark a choice matrix box. And I'm pretty sure these are all the different Cycle 1 endings, and I really didn't want to lose my ending. I really think there should be a thing saying if you're continuing your Cycle 1 journey, gain all missing Cycle 1 tech. And if you don't have one of each of the unique Titans, gain them. Oh, also I had a bunch of named Titans that didn't get brought over because it only says Argo bred Titans, which are the actually unique ones. And that's kind of lame because I really liked a lot of my named basic Titans that had certain pattern cards attached to them from story stuff. And speaking of keeping your choice matrix ending, strangely enough, if you lose and have to start over, you reset your choice matrix and then use the start a fresh campaign rules, which seems really weird that you randomize the previous cycle's ending. Also on that note, it's possible to go to Cycle 2 earlier than normal after a certain story prompt in Cycle 1. But having played some Cycle 2, that wouldn't make much sense given how everyone calls you a hero and compliments how you killed the big bad, which you obviously ran away from. Plus, you even start with tech made from the dead final boss. I'm curious as to how many people actually picked that option instead of just finishing Cycle 1, because if it's close to none, I question its inclusion because of the continuity break. Last campaign gameplay related thing to talk about is how the adventures are technically optional, but I'm gonna argue that they basically aren't, because the information and resources they offer you are all heavily integral to the main story. The rulebook gave me the impression that these were basically this game's version of side quests, describing them as sometimes relating to the main story, but literally all of them reveal something super important once they're finished, on top of providing amazing rewards. Yet, I would argue that the game's design doesn't even encourage going out of your way to chase after all of them because you have to randomly stumble into them instead of knowing where to look. On top of inherent restrictions like timeline length and doom progression, which both encourage you to be going briskly. What the game is trying to do here, from my understanding, is encourage multiple playthroughs to experience them all, especially because you can't get some of the adventure verses you've already done. But no way in hell I'd want to go through all the exact same battles again, which take up like 70% of time spent on this game. Therefore, I just flat out disagree with Doom tokens and the timeline end as mechanics. Doom, by the way, also provides even more cool stories to go through, which is a huge shame because you're incentivized to, not progress Doom to avoid losing. Thus, if you wanted to show off Doom stories to the player, just make them timeline events so that you're guaranteed to experience them. And if you want to keep Doom progression as a threatening punishment, just make certain bad outcomes push the closest Doom event closer by a day, which would accomplish the same thing. Then once you're out of Doom events so the bad guy's maxed out, don't just instantly game over, just make the effect hilariously terrible and unsustainable for the Argo so that you'll definitely eventually lose. But in practice, give more time than the timeline abruptly ending. This also opens the possibility of counterplay to stave off a cycle loss, so it's a more interesting way to have more time to get in whatever it is that you want, like combat to grind out more gear and or more adventures. That, or like mentioned earlier, just have better systems in place to allow the player to mechanically control how much they want to be fighting or adventuring. Deliver to the players a more cohesive experience right out of the gate. Don't scatter the pieces everywhere to encourage replayability because you risk just worsening the all-important first-time experience. Let the replayability come from more varied combat situations and the branching story decisions, not to mention finding all the pieces to a cycle's puzzle. On that note, yeah, Aeon Trespass has really questionable and contrived replayability, not because of lack of content, but from just how it's delivered to you. While the story is super unique and entertaining, the plot, which is the pacing and what's actually told you from the story, is atrocious. I was actually about to put the story in the cons until I decided to literally go grind out more adventures, not just because I was desperate to know what was going on, but also because I was scared I wasn't strong enough to fight the final boss because I had access to it on like day 50 out of 80. If your game has reached the point to make me even consider playing like that, something everything went wrong. And no, it wasn't me who went wrong. I just got lucky, or I guess actually unlucky, with some of the story cards spawning their random objectives hilariously close to me, so I progressed too fast. God, why is this game okay with fucking up story progression systems with dumb random bullshit, but not the combat progression systems? Like, what is going on? Anyways, because of how the plot played out for me, the story was extremely minimal because a lot of it was honestly just a wild goose chase that sets up Psycho 2, and you don't get back on track until like story card 3 out of 4. So after moving on to story card 4, which is the last stretch that goes you towards the epic conclusion, that was when I was like, oh shit, I need to grind. And I essentially just received an exposition dump from randomly happening to complete like 3 adventure endings right before the finale. If I hadn't done that, I literally would not even know who the true enemy is or any of the supporting characters' motivations because of their secrets, which would have made the finale a much more confusing spectacle of, alright, I guess stuff is just happening for no reason. Like, the characters allude to their secrets in ways that don't reveal it to you. 2 of the characters might potentially unalive themselves and you have no idea why, and you miss out on so many dialogue options. I also never even got to talk to the antagonist prior to the finale. Like, I saw him once, but then you're given an option to approach him or to save people. But like, come on, why wouldn't I save people? I'm supposed to be a goddamn hero. And if there's other ways to talk to him, I apparently missed all of them. But yeah, I basically had almost no idea who this dude was or what his motivations were, because the most I got were the Doom cards talking about the Punished is doing stuff. Ooh. Yeah, he's actually called the Punished. Very funny, I know. We can probably expect him wearing a black shirt with a Punisher skull on it while he ends the world. Point is, Aeon Trespass heavily pulls its punches with the plot, which basically ruins the otherwise super entertaining story, all in the name of replayability. And I genuinely believe that all of the adventure big story reveals should have been either incorporated into the main story or have some guaranteed way to discover them instead of random adventures. Like, oh, I don't know, placing points of interest on the map and making exploration matter. Wouldn't it be great if the map had tangible locations that affected the world around them? I definitely don't want to know the history behind a settlement where I might discover some secret lore and why it was built and how its placement affects the country's borders and which factions live there. That'd be fucking crazy. Like, I watched the no pun included review while making this review, and even FCA fell victim to this game's awful story delivery mechanisms.
The grief of a woman was oh so strong it tore a hole in reality, and now the monsters are coming out of it and making the world bad. Women's emotions accidentally destroying the world is not a trope that exactly sparks joy in me.
Because I was this close to also criticizing how the writing describes a woman unleashing an eldritch abomination because of her hysterical emotions. Oh my goodness, there's a huge bloody gash on her after that violent story event. Rar XD, is she gonna die? She's bleeding everywhere. No, it's just that time of the month, teehee. Better go end the world. I guess I should spoiler timestamp now, so skip to the recommender score if you don't want to hear me openly talk about the secrets and plot twists of Cycle 1. And if you want a quick summary of spoiler criticisms, I'm basically saying why I think Aeon Trespass doesn't have great messaging and why its world building is weak. Seriously, last chance, go click right now. Anyways, because I thankfully discovered the big epic secret, I learned that this was all on the big bad, the Punished, for summoning the Eldritch God, and not the woman who was allegedly gaslight gatekeep girl bossing too hard. That woman is Ariadne, by the way, daughter of King Minos. She was actually secretly married to the super charismatic freedom fighter called Theseus, and sacrificed herself to save him after they were betrayed right when Theseus and his followers were about to overthrow King Minos' tyrannical rule. Oh, also, Theseus is the Punished, you know, super not at all important story thing to know. Would probably add a lot to your understanding of the story if you knew that. Totally doesn't need to be revealed to the player at all. Let them randomly miss that tidbit. It's fine. Unbelievably cool reveal moment. Let's hide it away instead of showing it off. Also, put yourself in my shoes. Imagine learning that without even meeting the dude. Like, I could have gotten first impressions that then flipped on their head, but nah, instead I'm Facebook stalking and digging up old tweets via my favorite web browsing device, a city-sized boat. And while I'm talking about the story, I really questioned the portrayal of the themes of depression and lack of meaning that exist in Cycle 1. First of all, when you run into people in the story that are spouting their ideology about everything's pointlessness while they have corrupting maze lines sprouting all over their skin, you're blurring the line between whether or not this is an otherworldly force that's taking over people's minds, or whether they truly believe what they're saying and have just drank the Kool-Aid. The text didn't outright explain how this works and describes a vague mix of both, where it's constantly reminding you that these are downtrodden people who've given up all hope, so of course they're like this, but they're also treated as infectious without ever being outright described as such. It's functionally a pandemic you have to keep yourself safe from lest you catch the truth of the labyrinth, since apparently even just interacting with mazes can make you lose hope. The problem with doing this is that you're now muddying the messaging, because if it had done the whole treating their ideology as a virus thing without the pseudo mind control, control, that could actually be really interesting to explore how memes, the classical definition, spread and shape our collective consciousness, and whether or not dealing with bad ideas via ideologically quarantining them before treating them with counter arguments works fast enough to deal with the constant barrage, aka viral outbreak, of propaganda, fake news, and nihilist-flavored reactionary tendencies. Like really, how do you get through to these labyrinthians who dogmatically spread misleading info, albeit unknowingly? Because remember, it takes you as the player doing some serious digging to uncover those big story reveal secrets, so you're literally just dealing with the aftermath of propaganda spread from not only Minos' tyrannical regime spitting the truth on what happened to Theseus, but also his daughters, who are the current rulers of the Minoan Empire, pushing their own agenda. Then on top of that, labyrinthians react with immediate rejection to anything that could potentially progress the world for the better because they've given up, don't believe in reform, and prefer to stick to what they know, just wallowing in despair with no care about the world around them. We could also go into how it's easier to trick someone than it is to make them see they've been tricked, because the story touches on how people have a tendency to gravitate away from harsh truths. Like there's a part where you can literally run into a historian and either get some super biased propaganda from him because he's trying to placate certain status quo narratives, or you can get the truth out of him and learn that Theseus was really just a dumb fuck who didn't care about the people of Crete at first and was actually an Athenian sent to fuck up Minos' rule. But then he got dick concussed after falling in love with Ariadne to the point where he got completely lost in the sauce and cut himself off from Athens until eventually Ariadne went like, I can fix him, and got him to give a shit about liberating Crete because she cared about the people and didn't want to just run away with Theseus. Yeah, if everyone knew that and also knew Theseus is the Punisher who's causing the literal god of despair to rapidly turn the world into a giant maze while corrupting everything and everyone it touches, that's probably gonna make people heavily reconsider their positions. But do you see the glaring issue here? There's this really interesting ideological showdown just primed and ready to happen. But because there's a god that can sing a song of hopelessness to corrupt people's minds via magical bullshit, you're cheapening the beliefs people hold, because now you can just blame everything on the god. And literally all the cycle's problems are solved immediately upon killing it. All you had to do was swap around the power dynamic here. If the god was spawned via the collective will of people who are all super doomer pilled, then the god becomes a collective manifestation of a bad ideology taking shape. Also, no magically influencing minds allowed. Have the maze growths on people's skins either just be tattoos they put there themselves, or something they consensually allowed the god to do to them. Like, maybe even give them cool maze superpowers. That'd be super cool. But because at the end of the day, this all stems from Theseus having a gamer moment where he baby raged, then got banned from Twitch because the mods went rogue, aka Minos sabotaged his resistance leaders to orchestrate a betrayal, that means all of this no longer becomes an intriguing story about how the public sphere of ideas gets infected by apathy, where people no longer care about engaging with the truth of the real world's issues because it's easier to just give up. It's instead all just about Theseus. This is a story of how you're gonna defeat him. We've taken a systemic issue and reduced it to interpersonal issues. Like, great. We're actually dealing with a guy throwing a huge nihilistic tantrum after he loses his job and wife following the Twitch ban. With all that in mind, Cycle 1 is also fucking up the portrayal of cults, depression, and self-harm. The story refers to the labyrinthians as a cult, but given the scale they operate at and the way they behave, it's more like an established religion. So unless you're trying to say that religions are just big cults, which I mean could be valid criticism of every giant religious institution that abuses their power if you want to go that route, you probably shouldn't just call the labyrinthians a cult simply because it sounds more evil. Cults are usually smaller in scale, extremely insular, and keep its members trapped via indoctrination towards one or few charismatic leaders that are the end-all be-all for what the members should be thinking about. The labyrinthians aren't some smaller, closed-off group who are brainwashed into serving some egomaniac guy that's probably sexually assaulting all the women in the cult. They're out and about all over the place, constantly preaching their religion. And their messiah, punished Theseus, barely even leads. He's actually really uncaring and tells everyone to do whatever and nothing matters. But the labyrinthians follow him around regardless. Like, the only strong connection between labyrinthians and real-life cults is how they both recruit vulnerable people who are in a bad spot in their life. Which brings me to how Cycle 1 tends to portray depression and self-harm as when bad things happen to you and then you give up. So to bounce back, you have to find meaning and be willing to believe in hope for a better tomorrow. That, or just kill the god of despair and you'll be A-okay. And while adjusting your mindset can help move you out of a depressive pit you've dug yourself into, it's still irresponsible to solely present that solution, because whether intentional or not, it paints a picture of depression being a skill issue. Like, doy, live, laugh, love, bro. Just choose not to be depressed. Get up, do stuff you enjoy. And if you know anything about depression, that can be super dangerous, because someone whose brain is a little wacky when it comes to producing feel-good chemicals can feel even worse about themselves when they just try to believe harder for little effect on how they're feeling. That that person probably needs medication alongside therapy. But also, adjusting your mindset can only do so much if your material living conditions are absolute dog shit because of incredibly harsh systemic issues that force you to sacrifice your health and well-being just to exist and die. Just saying, self-harm isn't always just nooses and cutting. It's also alcohol, tobacco, and other drug abuse. It's work addiction. It's denying yourself sleep. Like, there's so many less obviously bloody theatrical ways it can manifest. And all that can easily slip in as distractions to addle the mind and move your thoughts away from disillusionment with the self that can come from broken dreams and aspirations crushed by an ever-demanding system wearing you down. Not to say that you shouldn't try and better yourself, like always try to do what you can with the means you have, but this is a much more nuanced human problem than just individual outlook. And the whole systemic aspect is very important to bring up, not just to better depict mass suffering, but to also add more rationale to the different factions. Fucked up systems making tons of people systemically incentivized to do fucked up shit is a great way to portray moral gray areas if everyone is pulled in different directions as to how they confront the shitty world they participate in and ultimately shape. Instead, what we have here is that dumb thing where there's a very clear evil side, King Minos and the Minoan Empire, but then in order to make the world more gray, the other two factions, the Labyrinthians and the Hornsworn, have to be just as evil. But unfortunately, it's super contrived. Minos literally makes a deal with Poseidon to gain tons of power at the cost of having to sacrifice a whole lot of people every so often to the Minotaur and the Labyrinth. Really can't defend his empire that kidnaps people from neighboring countries plus its own people just to feed a power-hungry ruler. Meanwhile, the Labyrinthians are just downtrodden people who are possibly being mind-controlled, and the Hornsworn are the remnants of Theseus' rebellion, still trying to dismantle the currently still corrupt Minoan Empire even with King Minos missing. Obviously, the Labyrinthians and the Hornsworn aren't the outright evil ones here, and the onus is on the Minoan Empire to stop being so oppressive. So in order to make the other factions in any way comparable, their actions have to be evil. So now we're doing the meme where the bad people are literally just in the right but then do cartoonishly evil things to remind the audience that they're bad. Like Pirithous, who's the Hornsworn leader, outright advocates for eradication of Labyrinthians. Just why? His argument is basically just calling the Labyrinthians ideological zombies, as in they're soulless, meaningless things that'll nihilistically bite you and turn you into one of them. If Pirithous' ideology was actually consistent, he'd recognize that Labyrinthians are just victims of an empire that lost all hope after Theseus' rebellion failed and the Olympian gods died. The Hornsworn's whole thing is that they recognize that Minos is bad and want to overthrow the Minoan Empire, so why would they ever go after its victims? If anything, it'd make more sense for him to be trying to recruit the Labyrinthians by convincing them that problems are caused by the Empire. And that is the meaning they should be chasing to better their lives. But no, he has to look evil, so he's killing innocent people. They're just zombies who've been infected by the Labyrinth god of despair. It's clearly not an ideological issue, but rather an eldritch entity mind-controlling people. Well, I guess to be fair, that's literally what's happening. Again, not a great way to portray genuine beliefs. But still, what the fuck, Pirithous? Like, dude, chill. I swear, turn around for 2 goddamn seconds and you see him yeeting depressed people off of cliffs. I'm not kidding, he literally pushes Labyrinthians off a cliff if you choose not to stop him. You don't have to do that to make the players doubt him, just make him incompetent. You could have all the best, most amicable beliefs in the world, but if you're constantly fucking up and making people's lives worse because of mismanagement, then the consequences of your beliefs can still make everything worse. Have him accidentally bomb trade ships instead of military ones. Maybe he keeps losing all his fights against the Minoans, so thousands die needlessly. Maybe he can't adequately supply his troops and still constantly sends them off in guerrilla missions that go wrong. Maybe show the inner workings of Hornsworn lifestyle and depict the very real cost and suffering of having to run away from cities and live in hideout caves where your quality of living drastically decreases. Instead, what we get are the Hornsworn being regularly depicted as unruly, disorganized fucks who brutally rob and kill innocent people for not very good reasons in addition to their regular attacks on the Minoan Empire. Yeah, even that's further undermined because it turns out some of the highwaymen are actually just spies from the Minoan Empire sent to make the Hornsworn look worse. But also, this is why it's much harder to write someone who has sensical beliefs as being evil, so why not just go with making him evil? Just make Pirithous French Revolution pilled. He wants to kill rich people babies. And then make him not care about the lower class that much by writing him as way too diehard on genocidal revenge against all Minoans and their supporters. Done. Then there's also a bit about whether or not we should be tearing down statues. In this case, Minotaur statues. And I don't know why we're still having this conversation in 2023 when I thought we all agreed that if a statue can represent bad beliefs but is historically relevant, they should be in museums so we can still preserve them without leaving them out in the public and possibly promoting something harmful. And the way Aeon Trespass presents the dilemma is of course by making some unruly unruly hornsworn teenagers threaten violence and want to tear down the Minotaur statues, versus an old priest dude who's maintaining them and leaving offerings like food and wine. First of all, why are we wasting food in a somewhat post-apocalyptic world of dead gods and roaming monsters that make people have to abandon their homes on the reg? And second, this whole dilemma is rather moot because, again, the hornsworn obviously have to be portrayed as rowdy douchebags to look bad, while the priest argues that the statue doesn't have to represent the cruelty of the Minotaur sacrifices and can represent the goodness from people coming to pray to it and even Ariadne's visits. Or it can even be symbolic of Ariadne's and Theseus' love post-slaying the Minotaur. Well, now we're just being revisionist to keep them up. Like, was needless mass suffering caused from people constantly sacrificed to the Minotaur, yes or no? If yes, we probably shouldn't be keeping bad vibes memorialized. And if you want to honor Ariadne and Theseus, just make statues of them standing next to the Minotaur so as not to muddy the interpretation for potential bad faith. Like, hello? Stuff like the statue debate and the hornsworn being meme highwaymen ultimately fucks up the messaging when Cycle 1 is constantly telling you to not be a coward. So you should pick a side because upholding the peace is the most important thing, since all that matters is that someone is in control and people believe in something. Don't know about you, but keeping the peace can mean a lot of different things. And picking who should be in power definitely matters a lot. Like, even if there's not supposed to be the obvious good/evil options, there's still an argument to be made for lesser evils because I'm pretty sure it's poggers to reduce human suffering as much as possible. I mean, I'm glad this game isn't encouraging being a disengaged extremist centrist, but doing a both sides bad thing, whether intentionally or not, does advocate for the bad side if there's good and bad, or if they're actually both bad, then the side that is more problematic than the other. As a result from all this, I basically just treated all the branching story paths as min-maxing decisions instead of actually role-playing like the game encourages you to do. This is possible because the choices do let you know some of the consequences of your decision right away. I sided with the Minoans because they give the best benefits and have a lot of territory around the middle of the map, so you'll traverse them often. But also, I felt really incentivized to go Team Minoan because you can immediately jumpstart your diplomacy with them by allowing the Minoan guide to join you at the very beginning, who also enables a ton more dialogue options to gain even more Minoan reputation. Being allied with Minoans basically means never having to deal with Argo whole resource issues, which is the hardest one to gain. But also, just want to point out that the campaign is decently punishing in general, which is not very conducive to role-playing. Unless, of course, it's intended for players to fail and have to repeat the cycle so they see more content and have access to better starting resources in addition to any prior knowledge gained. Last bits of random story cons before we finally score this behemoth. This one kind of ties into the lack of good world building, which is the inconsistent size depiction of the Argo. You look at the trade fleet dock or inward Odyssey art and just see how massive the side of this city ship is, and then you're gonna tell me that this thing reasonably goes through these slim as fuck river canals in Sparta? How does it ever make these 90-degree turns? The Argo's size always feels like it's shifting just to fit whatever the story needs it to be, so it's constantly getting bigger and smaller. Usually in the context of comparing it to other big things, like when one of the bosses gets either close or onto the ship. But also, if the Argo truly is a city-sized ship that people straight up get lost in, and you need multiple days plus an expedition crew to safely venture through its uncharted holdings, then like, how is running out of space to house people ever an issue? If this was framed more as being able to keep an eye on everyone, that's a whole nother thing. But multiple times in the story, you'll run into unaccounted folks, whether it be goofballs running amok or even whole ass secret society groups hidden within. You can even find a hidden forest with its own healthy ecosystem. Like, that's ridiculous. Then these last cons are just here to warn you about target audience, because this game very much feels like it was meant for a hetero man to be playing it. Like, all the Nemos cards to unlock your character's past depict a guy going through some shit, or with his eyes on a woman. And the game will randomly every now and then refer to your characters as he and sir, even though it's usually using like they or the Argonaut. This isn't an inherently bad thing. Like, if you want to make your story for men, that's totally fine. Just commit to it. Make the main characters men and have them dude bro their way through the adventure. Like, you're allowed to do that. But right now, this game seems like it wants you to roleplay a more custom character, yet a lot of the stories and art aren't exactly all-encompassing. The writing is a far cry from silent protagonists who can literally be anyone. Instead, the Argonauts feel like their own character, and in fact, I'd argue that they're just Shadow the Hedgehog. I'm not joking. They're somewhat brooding, a little snappy and or witty. They have amnesia, they search for purpose and question everything a lot. They mingle with all sorts of different people along the way, end up helping some while hurting others, but ultimately they're still trying to do the right thing before eventually finding purpose and becoming a hero. Then they find out they need power to back up their convictions, which is where I'm at right now in Cycle 2. And if we're still going by the Shadow the Hedgehog analogy, analogy, this would be when he goes out and collects all the Chaos Emeralds to become Super Shadow. Not sure how we're getting more power in Abyss Watchers to take down the living embodiment of guy you cover your drink around at parties, guessing it's by the power of friendship being stronger than one dude subjugating everyone since they all hate him and will eagerly ally with you. Oh, I should probably clear this up. I'm not saying Aeon Trespass's story has anything misogynistic with its messaging by being dude-centric. Like, there's plenty of moments where, say, a Spartan is being sexist and then totally fails to see the threat someone poses because they're a woman. It's just that the game very much feels like the Argonaut's perspective is a man's perspective. Yet, despite the text not saying anything sexist, we do have copious amounts of bare ass and titty that I literally can't show on YouTube. And I get that these are nymphs, so it's on flavor, but they also feel super shoehorned in because you unlock them randomly and then get their powerful abilities out of nowhere without much story relevance, so it's pretty much just sex appeal here. And no, you can't say it's fine from tons of jacked dudes in here as a counterweight, because unless you literally show dong or have them wearing obviously sexualized clothing like assless chaps and straps, it's a false equivalency because buff shirtless dude is generally empowering, whereas naked woman is kinda 50-50 on whether it's empowering or exploitative based on context. It's a shitty double standard, I know, but unfortunately, culturally, we aren't quite there yet where shirtless men and women are the same thing. I'm not saying booba bad, I do love me a woman consensually bouncing her calcium cannons, but like, there's a time and place for everything, and this ain't it, chief. If the designers threw in some cock and ball art on satyrs or something and they were just as randomly there as the nymphs, then this would be an entirely different story. Like, no one is complaining about Baldur's Gate 3 being hilariously horny with everyone's genitals on full display when it's being NSFW. Final target audience con is that Psycho 2 constantly uses an ableist slur, so that's a thing. Probably should have gotten a cultural consultant. Recommender score. Huge shout out to all of you who made it through the whole video so far. The watch time helps a lot more than you think. And if you came here from skipping to the end to see our scores, I honestly do not blame you. Anyways, recommender score, you know the drill. It's a critical evaluation of all the pros and cons weighed against each other to see how well it did what it said it's gonna do. In this case, it's a 1 to 4 player co-op campaign game about choice-driven adventures, exploration, fierce boss battles with giant monsters, and a mature story. Sounds like a great premise to me. And so, the recommender score for Aeon Trespass Odyssey is gonna be a 5 out of 10. An average game. As you've probably noticed, this is the most amount of cons we've ever had in a review to date, so why isn't the score lower? Well, it's not like Aeon Trespass Odyssey is bad or outright unplayable, though it does flirt with that boundary every now and then. It's just that its foundation is unsteady from having a deluge of ideas, both good and bad, melded into its core. If you were to chip away and refine everything, you'd end up with a super solid game. Because there's a lot of good in here with a lot of thought clearly put into it that's been muddled by too many mechanics out of left field crammed in, resulting in conflicting ideas and gameplay incentives. I cannot understate the pros about the story with all its super unique ideas and set pieces, alongside the combat being able to produce by far some of the craziest things I've ever seen in board gaming. And I can't understate just how massive this game is on a mechanical basis. For there's still tons of aspects that didn't make it in this analysis because they're just kind of there without really making anything better or worse. Like adventurers can place one random terrain tile on your next battle, or primordials occasionally having weak spots that are randomly accessed. Point is, there's a decent base here cut with weak sauce, and everything comes together to even out as an average score. This is even considering that we weigh components less than gameplay, yet on that end with component issues alone, this game would never go past an 8 out of 10. Hopefully most of that gets fixed with second printing. And that's something which is only further exacerbated by this game's weight, because already I wouldn't recommend this to the majority of board gamers looking for a campaign game unless you know you can handle heavy games. That, or you're okay with saying fuck it and making up the ruling if you're stuck, which is something even people familiar with this game are already doing due to clarity issues. And if you need comparisons, I'd say this is probably the second hardest board game I've had to learn. Number 1 goes to High Frontier, and for other campaign games, Frosthaven and Tainted Grail are nowhere close to top 10 hardest to learn board games for me. Those games, in my experience, feel much easier to learn because while they are complex, the complexity mostly manifests as hundreds of different things, each doing one function. Whereas Aeon Trespass is like there's 100 different things that each individually do multiple different functions, which is exponentially more rulings to track. Note that I'm talking about learning, not actually playing, because honestly, Aeon Trespass Odyssey isn't that hard to play when it comes to decisions in depth. Like, I struggle with controlling multiple characters in Spear Terra Island and Frosthaven, while this game four-headed is easy peasy. On top of that, as someone who's been taking great care to play rules as written alongside designer responses on BGG if there's mistakes / bad wording, not gonna lie, it didn't feel great playing that way when it slows down the game way too much for not enough impact. The ruling usually ends up mattering just as often as it doesn't, because technically speaking, randomness could have made the result go either way. Plus, the designers aren't going to be there to answer every single question about every single mistake. And from reading a ton of different BGG comments in regards to rules mistakes, seems like a huge amount of people aren't even playing rules as written anyways, both intentionally and mistakenly. If you can't stand playing your games without being certain that you're going by rules as written, then I cannot recommend Aeon Trespass. Of course, if I recommend that you don't play rules as written, then obviously the scoring here doesn't mean anything, because at that point we'd be playing different games. And on that note, different people are going to have vastly different experiences with this game, not just from doing the rules differently, but also purely from randomness. Like, who the hell are these people that are lucky enough in cycle 1 to get 3 rare hecaton cores so they can not only craft and fully upgrade this hilariously unobtainable 3-handed greatsword, but also craft the Earthshaker Titan needed to wield 3-handed items. Plus, they didn't have that Earthshaker randomly die from some nonsense. Point is, Aeon Trespass is the definition of your mileage may vary, and if the way you play campaign games is particularly loose with the rules, plus you mostly want really cool story and vibes, the analysis and scoring here isn't relevant to that playstyle. So if that's your jam and you love the aesthetics, this game is a great pickup if you can fully dedicate. Also, when it comes to the combat, make sure that you love it, since that's where the majority of your playtime is going. And because there's quite a bit of repeat fights with the exact same terrain layouts and exact same boss decks, so being like a mild enjoyer is gonna be a tough sell. Do not get sucked in by all the really cool marketing without doing some due diligence, because even I was getting absolutely enthralled with reading the Kickstarter campaign, since the cycle overviews were immediately captivating me with how they present their aesthetic and ideas much better than the actual game. At least right off the bat, because deeper into the cycle, that's obviously not the case. Like, I've never seen this labyrinth blood monster art in the game. I didn't even know the Labyrinthoros was called the Way Watcher, which finally made the brief lore description in the book make sense to me, because I thought it was talking about some other thing that was related to this boss. But yeah, it's pretty annoying that there's art here not in the actual game, because the Punished from Cycle 1 could have been a lot more ominous if this was shown at some point. Also really want to emphasize having a lot of time on your hands, because not only is this possibly 300 hours worth of content, the cycles are ultimately balanced around all the randomness evening out in the long run. So it can be harder to grasp that perspective if you're playing a few hours once a week while having a string of bad luck souring all these brief play sessions, versus being able to play all day more regularly and allowing tough times to bounce back much quicker. That, and it's easier to manage when you have the game fresh on your mind so you don't forget what you're doing, which is even more important here than in other games due to its complexity and difficulty. The nature of having to track a bunch of different campaign resources that can all result in game overs does mean Aeon Trespass is pretty hard. Like, you really don't want to be keeping them too uneven or have any capped out to waste rewards. And it can take multiple sessions before you shift the numbers around how you'd want. Not to mention all the timeline combat in between the voyaging, because I can't imagine doing a cool story thing that results in a boss. Then next week you get a timeline battle, then the week after you get a random battle from either exploring or the adversary, and then finally, now that it's been 3 weeks later, you're back to the story. And the point about randomness evening out also applies to the battles. But in this case, over the long run, expect a little more in the boss's favor, since it's more likely your good luck ends up being meaningless, like a critical attack that fails to wound, versus the boss's good luck attack resulting in tons of guaranteed harm or just outright death. This absolutely isn't a game to just dip your toes into and back out, because you don't really get a good feel of how the combat actually plays until like 6 fights in, when you've hopefully gotten reflex gear for everyone while the bosses actually gain their trademark abilities. And the voyaging mechanics in Cycle 1 are incredibly lacking in comparison to Cycle 2. Like, even only being 30 days into Cycle 2, it's apparent how you gotta track even more resources and your travel routes actually matter now. To the point that I've been prioritizing structural tech that helps with voyaging more than combat, so that I have a positive supply of everything. On that note, the recommender score was on the cusp of being 6 after trying Cycle 2, because enough of the cons were slightly addressed enough, though never outright fixed. Like, as an example, travel decisions matter more because you have to really think about how you avoid enemy strongholds. Plus, way more pathing is blocked off. Also, the fights aren't as repetitively one note with how you use reflex. Like, Cyclonus is way more unpredictable, so the fight is more like a cross between a slugfest and a dance, with how you need to have all of the Titan's reflex in and out on rotation based on your weapon type. But at this point, I'm too lazy to explain the nuance. What I'm trying to get at is, while further complexities can address the cons, they don't change core issues to outright fix them. And if it turns out Cycle 3 is drastic enough to change something foundational, it's most likely too little too late, because the player would have had to play for like somewhere between 100 and 200 hours to get there. So the only time it would matter would be if you're a new player that starts with Cycle 3, but yeah, I don't know about that. Aeon Trespass could have easily scored much higher if the game was solely the free play mode, where you pick an enemy, pick their level, then pick your cool loadout, and have at it. Though the official player count would also need to say 1 to 2 unless drastic reworks were done, like mentioned in the cons, to either focus more on the crunchy positioning puzzle plus giving all the players more options on a turn so it isn't just one move, one attack, or to add even more randomness plus mitigation so that it can be a goofy spectacle game for everyone. But otherwise, free play really lets all the best parts of the combat shine without any other weird extraneous circumstances bogging it down. And it has an unbelievable amount of variety because you're free to build craft with everything you've unlocked to your heart's content. Plus, the high-level bosses can have much more drastic changes that force really out there gameplay they could never do in the normal campaign, because you can't just change around everyone's loadout super freely to counter the problem. Simply put, the amount of content in theater mode is staggering and offers far more replayability than the combat you'll do in a cycle. Comparing pure freeform combat from theater mode versus normal campaign combat is like the prime example of something I'd point to when saying that it's clear this game was heavily playtested, but the effort feels almost misguided because it's as if there were a ton of fixes made by adding extra rules to flawed foundations to get them to work smoother instead of just getting a better foundation. That type of design is the easiest way to end up with a ton of rules exceptions and layers upon layers of additional clauses that make the gameplay feel particularly gamey and less intuitive, which is a surefire way to undermine thematic presentation if you're trying to express that via gameplay as a narrative mechanism. It's like how when writing code, you should try to follow best practices and not over-engineer unless you want to end up with Yandere Simulator. And as someone who doesn't code, I don't know why I've been getting recommended so many coding videos about that game right around the time I started playing Aeon Trespass. I think the universe is trying to tell me something. But also, as someone who got to see the inner workings of Frosthaven as a playtester, I was surprised how often things would get scrapped or reworked entirely to better fit within already existing rules and effects. And if there was something that often repeated with specific variations every time, they'd find a way to consolidate them all into something universal. Prior to that experience, I just kind of assumed, oh, if this thing doesn't work, we'll just playtest it enough until you figure out ways to balance it. So like tweak the numbers, throw in a rules exception saying it doesn't work in this one case because that's too busted. But that's just brute forcing your way through versus coming up with something more elegant that still upholds your intention while remaining intuitive. At the end of the day, there is a lot to love here, but if you're interested in the late pledge at the time of this review, I'd recommend being absolutely certain that the issues here don't bother you, because 1, this game is already more niche because of its weight, and 2, even if you fit into this super heavy campaign niche, there's a lot of potential landmines with so many different systems intersecting here. For everyone on the sidelines, either do some heavy research or be on the lookout for if this ever gets a second edition overhaul or a heavily improved sequel. Hopefully their upcoming 12 Sins of Heracles does adjust that, because there is so much potential here. But potential is a hard sell when the big white box is like 300 something bucks. Otherwise, for everyone else who's really into this, Aeon Trespass has a lot of game to play through and a crazy cool story to experience. Anyways, time for Ashton's personal score.
Hi, I'm Ashton, and my personal score for this game is a 4 out of 10, below average. Overall, I found this game to be lacking in the sort of nuance from my only large comparison point, which is Frosthaven, and D&D in general, I guess. This definitely just felt like you run into a room and you punch a big bad guy over and over again until they die. I played a few times, and I didn't play any of the campaign mechanics, so most of my score is coming out of the fact that the combat just didn't feel good enough for me. For context, I only played a few scenarios of this game in the Mystis Theater mode. We fought against Hecaton, the Chimera, and the Labyrinthos. There were like cool effects here and there that triggered, but like Daniel mentioned earlier, all of the nuance in this game really comes down to items. Like each of the characters does have a little bit of flavor to them, but ultimately it's the different items that you tack onto your character. And because of that, it doesn't feel like I'm actually playing the characters in the same way as when I was playing Frosthaven and each of the characters has a nuance to it, or when you're playing in D&D and your character has like something built onto it that feels so much more personal. Whereas I honestly couldn't tell you which of the characters that I played here. And that to me just feels a little bit disappointing because I don't feel attached to my character in the same way. And I think more importantly, it just feels like the game is limited. When I was playing the trap class in Frosthaven, for example, the whole game changed compared to when I was playing Blinkblade when I first started. Which brings me to another point. Multiple enemies allows for a lot of variance that you see in other games like in D&D and in Frosthaven, and even in Hero Quest, for example. The fact that there are multiple different enemies allows you to walk into a room and come up with multiple different ways of fighting those different enemies. And then the variation in which you fight like one enemy and then another means that you have to have a fluid play style between the different types of enemies you fight. But the fact that there's just one main big boss here, even if it has different phases, means that fundamentally you know what you're going to be fighting as you go into it. What is going on back there? I think personally, I really don't like boss battlers, the sort of central boss idea. It just limits me, I think, in my ability for creative expression on the board itself. Like, okay, there's obviously strategy involved in this game in positioning and some sort of basic battle tactics, but it doesn't feel the same as like having a whole different decision space when I walk into a scenario. When I compare to like playing something, I guess playing D&D, it feels like I'm playing with a DM that's incredibly controlling about the actions that I can take and limits me to looking at exactly what's on the board. Like I just hit a wall and I can't get past that. The strategy is so limited to how well you can punch this thing and then positioning correctly so you don't get hit back. The fact that you only have one attack means so much rides on that attack where like missing it just kind of ruins your entire turn. Again, going back to the Frosthaven example, the fact that you have like the top and bottom of each card and you get to do it feels like you get to do multiple things every turn in a way that you don't really get in this game. And also the fact that it's one attack and then a string of keywords right afterwards, it's so frustrating. Personally for me, I feel like I keep forgetting keywords, but on top of that, just the fact that I have to go like, oh, okay, I'm resolving this and then I have to remember to resolve this afterwards and then follow the sequence of ways that things resolve and then make sure to count the right number of dice for everything. The first time we played was against Hecaton, which was a fun experience. However, because me and the other friend that we were playing with was really inexperienced, Daniel, I could feel Daniel going like, oh, they just one move they could have done correctly. And I could feel the energy emanating from him. And the annoying part about that is I knew that most people that aren't Daniel, are going to be way too tempted to quarterback in those situations. And the game is really easy to quarterback with. One, you do one thing on your turn and it's not like Spirit Island where you do multiple things on your turn and it kind of naturally prevents quarterbacking. And two, your characters aren't unique enough to prevent quarterbacking in some meaningful way. The only thing that's unique are the items. Like in Frosthaven, because each character is so unique, quarterbacking is very difficult because I might know how to play my character really well, but it's really difficult for me to know how to play your character really well. They're so innately different. But Daniel, as someone who's played the game at least a few times before we had, knew how all of the items worked. And me, a newcomer, looking at this array of keywords goes, okay, I have no clue what these are, so let me just ask Daniel. At which point, 90% of people that aren't good about like keeping themselves in check in terms of quarterbacking are just gonna go, let me just do it for you. Because that's just easier if you have like 10 keywords chained in a row, right? Especially as you get to more complicated things, trying to add people into the game is just really difficult.
I thought I was doing a terrible job. Before I got quarterback, I was like, okay.
No, like, and that's the thing, right? Like, you were doing a really good job of holding my quarterback, and that's why we lost. It's just because all of the keywords are so, like, hard to reconcile with my lack of understanding of the game that it's just... Aids. Yeah, and there's no good player aids, too. And the fact that player aids on the back of your... That's the wrong one. The fact that the player aids, like, on the back of your player board is also a little bit of a pet peeve for me. They could have just put it on a separate card and made our lives a lot easier. I want to compare the three bosses that I fought. There was Labyrinthos, which basically placed down labyrinth tiles as you fought them. There was Hecaton, which pushed you around. And then there was the Chimera, which has 2 extra positions for you to go on top of, and then also drops like these ambrosia things behind their movement. Now, notice the only big difference between these 3 things is where I position myself on the board. I'm sure that there might be other bosses where this isn't necessarily true, but ultimately, if I just found myself in the right position, for example, navigating around the labyrinth tiles correctly, or for example with Hecaton, just dodging the monster's path and just stepping aside, like again, positioning myself in the right spot, or with the Chimera, positioning myself away from the ambrosia tiles and on top of the Chimera. There's only so few things that you can change about this game because of, like, in some weird sense, its simplicity. It feels like the only things that you can actually vary from boss to boss are the positioning, but ultimately you're just positioning yourself in the right spot and then punching the boss. Most of the strategy for that is taken care of before you actually start playing the scenario. Largely, it feels like the variation between bosses is how do I position myself and not what unique characteristic does this boss have that I have to fight against. Like, the different bosses just add a different way of doing that, but once you figure out the gimmick, I just know where to position myself, and then you just keep punching them till they die or you get unlucky. I think the Hecaton, for example, the fact that it pushed you off the map was an interesting mechanic and a cool way that it could fight, but it felt like because because we just positioned a little bit out of that, it didn't make a difference for us. Like we walked into the room prepared to deal with that, and we had no choice but to deal with that, because if we didn't, it would kill us. The fact that it was such a strong stake, the fact that like if you got hit by it, you just died immediately, felt like it never occurred to me. It's like that weird effect where like, because something is such a serious consequence, it'll never hit you in a game because you're just going to position your way out of it. At least for me, that felt like it could have added something cool to the game if it wasn't that it just knocked you out and killed you as soon as you hit the end of the map, but rather it like could do something else that was potentially interesting. Again, it comes down to the fact that the consequences in this game feel so serious. Like it's just pretty much death in a lot of cases, that like you can't take the necessary risks to do a lot of cool things in the same way that you can in other games. At least that's how it felt to me. Oh, that was actually kind of a fun thing that I like. You don't find a lot of fighting games where your characters get more powerful as they fight. Well, I guess Spirit Island's kind of like that, but that's not really a fighting game. Like, yeah, as your character like lowers health, it might like have different problems, but like the rage mechanic is actually pretty cool. But I did like the escalation mechanic, that everything gets kind of stronger as it goes, especially the way the bosses work. It was kind of cool to see the bosses get stronger throughout the game in kind of a meaningful way, because it felt like when I killed the boss all the way at the end, it was like killing this epic monster that I had like gotten to understand throughout the scenario. Whereas maybe in games that don't have strong like bosses that escalate in strength over time, you kind of feel like you're just whittling down the monster that like used to be powerful and was like kind of whatever at the end. When we were playing with one of our friends, when we first played against Hecaton, it felt like a lot of times he didn't actually have the opportunity to attack in general, and also missing attacks and like foregoing attacks is an important strategy piece in this game, which does feel at odds with the design of rage like sort of monotonically increasing throughout time. That just doesn't make sense to me. Like the fact that your character should power scale but doesn't power scale is a little bit frustrating, especially as the boss gets more and more powerful. You just kind of tend to leave like players that aren't as experienced and don't know how to properly like manage their rage behind. And even if players that do, like if you just get a little unlucky in positioning with Hecaton, for example, it just like moves clear across the map every once in a while, like it's just kind of difficult to maintain everything and move around properly. The fact that escalation isn't tied to like a constant static increase, like I just wish every round your rage just ticked up and then there was like additional things you could do to make your rage higher, because it would just make the game flow a lot smoother for everyone that's playing it. I actually liked the token system. It forces you to play with your friends in a way that like other games might not do the same thing. The fact that like you attacking, like you can't use the Kratos tokens that you create is pretty cool. I enjoyed that mechanic because it allows you to sequence turns correctly. Yeah, it does kind of play into quarterbacking. It also, like another big thing with Kratos tokens is it encourages the person that knows more about the game, or the person that like damage, like knows how to do more damage, I guess, to just like forego other people's actions and like skip to being their turn, I guess. Yeah, it seems to matter too much the order in which your turns are taken, just because you always want to put the person that's a heavier hitter like right after the person that can generate the most tokens, and that just feels like a static design. And if you're not positioned correctly for that, you just kind of like forego a lot of damage possibility, because one person can just say, oh, this person should go, and then this person should go, and then this person should go. The Kratos token thing kind of forces the sequence of players in a way that's really conducive to quarterbacking, and kind of disappointing if you're playing, because sometimes it just means your turn is not useful. Closing thoughts. I think the game has a good amount of potential in some very interesting ways, but overall, I wouldn't personally want to play this game, largely because the setup for this game is a little bit of a pain, even though Daniel did do most of the setup for me. And on top of that, it doesn't feel like the characters have enough flavor. If I'm going to be spending this amount of time playing a game like this, especially a cooperative game that I can play with my friends, there's a lot of other games that I'd rather be playing in the 3 hours that it takes to play this one. Is it not 3 hours?
Well, it should be like 2. I think it took a while to set up, right?
Okay, we'll say 2 hours. I mean, 3 hours plus setup. Like I would include setup and playtime.
My personal score for my personal enjoyment of Aeon Trespass Odyssey, I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. A good time. Though I want to heavily emphasize that my enjoyment is in constant fluctuation. This is just where it's at right now on day 30 into cycle 2. I can easily see it going down following a string of bad luck, or after I start getting tired of the once super fresh bosses. But hey, at least the story has been hugely entertaining as always. Love traveling through the blighted lands of East Palestine, Ohio to stop the Nietzschean from spilling more chemicals everywhere. I seriously cannot get enough of all the crazy, stupid fun spectacle that's constantly being described in the storybook text. Like, it is by far my strongest drive when playing this game. Anyways, for more context on my ever-changing scoring, my first impressions of this game was straight up a 2 out of 10 terrible time when I played it with Ashton and friends doing the tutorial. The gameplay was the most tedious, brain dead thing I've done in a while because everyone has no items and you literally just run up to the Hecaton and hit it with your fists over and over again until it dies. With the only tactics that matter being the usual, don't stand with your back to the column in case you get knocked back. Rotate aggro. Don't drag the boss away from the group. Very bog standard. Otherwise, the dice rolls dictated everything, which thank God we were decently lucky because we were also decently stupid since 1, Ashton was out of position the whole fight and never got an attack in, and 2, we had a friend die decently early because we didn't rotate aggro at all. Already, it's really apparent that the game works better if someone is quarterbacking or you play it solo. Afterwards, we spent way too long digging through the box not being able to find an oversized tech card hidden in a no trespassing packet because we didn't know the unboxing guide existed. And eventually, when everyone had to leave, I'm like, you know what? I'm bringing this game home and I'm gonna deep dive the shit out of it. No more goofball friend mode where we all share one brain cell. If it hasn't been made clear already from this review, this is a really heavy game. You cannot go in just following the learn to play guide as you play. So I'm home and it takes me almost 3 days to read everything front to back and get it all properly organized because the insides were a localized tornado following that night. Everyone's digging around looking for one big tech card. Also for context, the way I go through rulebooks is really slow because I act out everything as I read it using the actual components, which keeps everything super ingrained in my brain. Also, I went through our email and found links to the unboxing guide and official companion app, which were essential in my opinion. Somehow, Ashton missed those, which still bewilders me because he did print out some sheets, which would require you to go to Into the Unknown's website under resources, where you clearly see there's a companion app for bookkeeping and the unboxing guide is also there. Point is, starting this game was disastrous, so I was glad I could commandeer it myself with a fresh new perspective, which the game immediately soured again because of how dull the early battles are and how one-dimensional the voyage phase was. Then it immediately shot back up to a good time once I unlocked Reflex and the bosses gained their trademark abilities because now there was actually thoughtful gameplay happening, especially when solo, because now you can actually crunch over 4 titans since playing only 1 or 2 is so basic and boring. I'm having a blast, but then fights got tedious again because very quickly I realized I'm doing the same tactics over and over against the same bosses that don't change nearly enough for my taste because I want my decision making to be way more fresh every fight. Doesn't help either that my luck has been below average for the whole cycle so far, but enough wacky helpful things happened to retain my hope, which in hindsight really just felt like insert whatever gambling MMO loot box addiction here, considering how my enjoyment was being drip fed as I'm always chasing the next number go up gear or the next die roll. But yeah, it literally takes getting to cycle 2 to finally get a fresh new coat of paint over the game, plus making the voyaging a little more mechanically thoughtful to get me back to good times. That and the free play theater is absolutely amazing. Look, at the end of the day, I like the combat solo and I like the story. These were made very clear to me after playing theater mode like 5 times, plus going back and reading the Cycle 1 storybook for fun after beating it. But holy fuck, the mechanics that exist within Cycles really does a lot to dampen the experience for me personally. In terms of personal gripes that aren't cons, I don't like crafting systems when they deal with really high numbers and would much rather just have currency at that point. I also don't personally enjoy not being able to regularly go full power in combat due to campaign resource limitations. And I also don't enjoy extremely railroaded progression systems. So like even if the game was designed to work better within those limitations, it wouldn't be for me. Reminder that the railroading here is actually done really well. So if it wasn't for all the random auxiliary crap that can completely derail it alongside powerful unique titans being obtained from random rare resources, the balance would be immaculate. Then of course when it comes to the story, the voyaging mechanics fuck it up for me personally because I love lore, I love world building, but none of those things pop up during ship movement, which to me feels really overloaded with mechanics and is overall super abstracted from the story at hand, which also causes me to not be able to suspend my disbelief as much when I can't tie events to locations since the entire map is comprised of nameless and generic icons instead of actual places. So the sense of scale, importance, and societal reactions to story events feels completely off. Like Tainted Grail's exploration absolutely trounces Aeon Trespass in this regard, because there's no moments in this game where you hear people talk about a place of importance, then you follow their directions to go there before listening to the people at said place talk about themselves. Nor are there times you come back to a place to see how they react to something you did. And neither are there instances of massive anticipation caused from the buildup of lore you obtained from prior exploration. Like Aeon Trespass has anticipation for the next story beat, but not for like, say, hearing a bunch about the fabled Camelot and the Knights of the Round Table before finally getting to visit them, revealing the location card and its art, which then makes you go like, whoa, that's what it looks like. As a result, I basically just treat the story like great junk food TV, or a fun shonen, because it's really compelling, but not exactly anything I'd get really lost in. Anyways, after this review, I'm probably gonna join the ranks of fellow players online who aren't playing correctly anyways, and whenever I run into something confusing, I'll just make a judgment call and move on. I can see my personal score going up once I'm free from the shackles of rules as written, which of course kind of defeats the purpose of a score, especially considering I also want to skip a good chunk of the fights, just like with Tainted Grail. At which point, I'll also need to figure out how resources will work, and honestly, I may just stop tracking them entirely and just say, after every fight, I'll receive like 3 items from what's available to craft, because I'm really tired of the constant accounting and trading of resources now that I've already done it a bunch. If the resources actually went back into the campaign instead of being used to chase a higher number on your gear, I'd care more, but at the moment, it's such a time sink to peruse your crafting lists and budget everything after every fight. Furthermore, because I was sitting on like 5 Sisyphus tiers after cycle 1, I'm also really considering being able to use them for powerful one-time effects like changing dice results instead of replaying battles. Because I found that losing fights was inconsequential enough that I'd rather just move on instead of replaying them. Unless a unique titan died, then I would have said I'd house roll tiers to be able to save them, but there's already a mechanic for that in cycle 2, as if it needs another reason to be better than cycle 1. Will this make the game significantly easier? I don't think so on the gear end, because it's basically the same output, but the tiers thing, definitely. Though I still don't think it's as unbalanced as when someone gets a really powerful secret weapon early on from getting lucky. Like, it's pretty tilting to be reading online about a guy going like, yeah, I fully upgraded the secret weapon you can get from Labyrinthos, which does the same damage as the strongest weapon you can normally craft, plus no drawback, and it ignores wound responses. So I used it to kill the adversary in cycle 1, which unlocks this super overstated game changer titan, so yeah, I've never struggled with wounding bosses. And for context, killing an adversary is a huge deal. Like, you're usually not supposed to be able to kill the adversary of your cycle unless you got luck on your side, since they're straight up harder than the cycle's final boss, and it's much more common to kill it in the next cycle. This also has me wondering how much people are cheating when it comes to their rolls, because it feels like it's been around 20 times I've been 1 damage off getting a wound during a crit chance and just played it through. Are people just tipping the die and saying fuck it, close enough? Like, how is it such a given that a ton of people all seem to have access to unique titans and crazy gear? Is it just because once they got lucky early, that powerful weapon made it easier to land important hits later on, which then gave them more rare and powerful loot? Like, I wasn't even able to use a full team of multiple unique titans until the very end, thanks to an adventure rewarding an Earthshaker titan. And the only time I crafted a unique titan, like mid-cycle, it got wrecked. Though honestly, I could have potentially saved that Maze Runner with a Sisyphus tier, but it didn't feel strong enough for me to care, and I really didn't want to redo a fight I was obviously winning that happened to have an unlucky death right at the end. And in case I haven't made it abundantly clear at this point, I'm certain I'm one of the unlucky few who's on the lower end of the bell curve. Not like abysmal, unplayable luck, but definitely way more unlucky than lucky. I think I've survived only like 3 obol draws ever, so cycle 2's drawback of making obos a 1/3 chance instead of a 1/2 didn't even matter to me. And every time I get a crit chance, it's so common that the damage dice decide to fail me. Or it was an attack I was intending to fail in the first place, so it wasn't set up at all. It basically felt like most of the time I was lucky, it was in an ultimately useless scenario. And every time I was unlucky, I would instantly die for it, which, needless to say, didn't feel great. Like, I did get the Labyrinthos secret armor at some point, but it's only okay and fell off in usefulness really quickly for me once I unlocked armor with excellent stats. And I wasn't able to upgrade it into a cool weapon until literally the last fight of cycle 1 because it needed those cores you get from landing criticals on level 3 body cards. Then I didn't get to use it because I ended up winning cycle 1 by skipping the final battle due to adventure choice unlock options. So honestly, at that point, it just felt like the entire game was playing a cruel joke on me. Man, I wish I could be in cycle 3 already, because I was reading online how you get so much more luck control, and goddamn, these keywords would have enabled so many crits for me. Like, you have no fucking idea. But yeah, my own experience is why I could never harp on anyone who's complaining about the game online for being too random. And I was getting bad gatekeepy vibes from reading comments from people defending Aeon Trespass for basically saying, skill issue, cheap random deaths are exceedingly rare. Dude, I've had 3 deaths on the first boss turn before the Titans even took a turn in cycle 1. Like, just No. Fuck the Maze Emergence traumas for enabling Temenos and Labyrinthos insta-kills, and fuck the Pursuer insta-kill judgment attacks. I even re-rolled all 3 dice with Fate and still died, which was absolute horseshit. Also, I'ma share a little secret, cause this is eating at my conscience. This is the only board game I've intentionally decided to cheat in so far. After the first turn kill led to a defeat because the luck never bounced back my way that fight, the next 2 first turn kills I restarted the fight without spending a redo tier because I was pissed off. But it's not like it mattered in the end anyway, since I had 5 Sisyphus tiers. Oh, I also fudged an adventure group test where you roll 4 d10s trying to get 6 or above on 2 of them, and even after 1 reroll each, I failed all of them. Like, what the fuck? That is 4 instances of 75% all missed. Dude, even at my unluckiest in Tainted Grail, which led to me almost dying and losing all my items, I played it through. Though I'd say I probably did it because it feels way more aggravating to fail 8 dice rolls in a row with good odds than it is just failing 1 at an exceedingly cool story moment. But back to Aeon Trespass personal score stuff, I'm also not a huge fan of the aesthetics. I like my dark fantasy to look closer to Soulsborne games, but instead of badass knights, titans are mostly half naked. On top of that, there's just a lot of familiar artistic designs that aren't wowing me as much as I'd like. Like, You Died is straight out of Dark Souls. Traumas look like Destiny 2's defeat screens. The labyrinths all look like Destiny's robot architecture. Titans are conceptually too similar to Attack on Titan. And while I enjoy the battles and story, for gameplay, I'd still rather play Frosthaven, and for story, Tainted Grail appeals to me so much more. It's got the Dark Souls Knights thing going on, and there's exceedingly more art at every corner on top of excellent exploration mechanics. If I want the best in both worlds, I'd just play D&D 5e, or just play Frosthaven again. I also like the minis way more in both these games, and I definitely want to paint them all, not just for use in their games, but also for D&D. Can't say the same for Aeon Trespass minis because of their detailing with tiny trees, houses, ships, etc. to remind you that they're massive, so they'd look weird being used for TTRPGs. Also, with how bland the board looks, honestly the gray statue-like minis look well suited for it, because when I see pics online of painted minis on the board, it looks bleh to me. Tons of skin tone on brown ain't vibrant enough. Like, if we're being monotone, I'd much rather super dark and black shades everywhere, like Darkest Dungeons or Cryptic Explorers if you want pure black and white. Also, on that note, there's this aesthetic disconnect in my mind when it comes to Aeon Trespass, because while it is an edgy fantasy aesthetic, it's not that dark, which really fucks with me considering how much brutal death is happening in game. To me, it looks more like an accessible thematic dice chucking game when it's actually way more niche, which is a huge bait because when I see Dark Souls You Died and Dragon Ball Instant Transmission, it just screams something more mainstream and casual. Yes, Soulsborne games are mainstream and arguably casual since they have easy modes called using magic builds or summoning friends for help if it hasn't been obvious at this point with Elden Ring's success. And for how much other games try to emulate Souls games, a lot of them really miss the mark on this, especially on how Dark Souls deaths are mostly just small annoyances and never unfairly out of your control. If you want seemingly unfair, brutal deaths, make your game more like Fear and Hunger instead. TLDR, I mostly like Aeon Trespass Odyssey, but the enjoyment I get is super inconsistent. I primarily love seeing what happens next in the story, and as a result, a ton of the cons don't personally bother me that much. But the ones that really irk me are the repetitive battles, resource grind to chase better gear, lack of different actions available in combat, and how there's no location world building tied to exploration. This game shares a lot of my personal gripes with Tainted Grail, where I'm definitely gonna skip fights and house roll everything so I can zero in on their stories and drastically raise my personal enjoyment. For now, my plan is to set Aeon Trespass aside, just like I did for Tainted Grail's stretch goal campaigns, and I'll eventually come back once certain releases happen. Like for Tainted Grail, I definitely want to play through Kings of Ruin when it's finished, and later go through all the older campaigns with their 2.0 versions. Aeon Trespass Odyssey, I really want to experience all of the story one day, so I'll make sure Cycles 4 and 5 are out before going through all of them, because I do love binging through the entirety of something if possible, and the runtime will probably be cut down by like 200 hours from skipping half the fights. Whew! Video's finally over. Please consider supporting us by becoming a patron at patreon.com/shelfside or buying merch from shelfside.co. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I'm gonna chill out on giant videos for a while and play some Baldur's Gate 3. See ya.